Hey legends! Welcome to The Fiction Wizard. Buckle up for today's story. McGonagall scanned Harry and found 89 compulsion charms. Dumbledore was named. A like and subscribe goes a long way. Now let's jump in. Chapter 1. The weight of 89. The classroom was quiet in the way that Transfiguration classrooms are never actually quiet. There was always the scratch of quills, the soft grunt of concentration, the occasional crack of something going wrong that shouldn't have gone wrong. Third years on a Tuesday afternoon, working through the intermediate stages of human-to-animal partial transfiguration, and McGonagall moved between the rows with her hands clasped behind her back and her eyes cataloguing everything. She was a woman who noticed things. It was, she'd long ago decided, both her greatest professional asset and the reason she slept poorly most nights. She paused behind Lavender Brown, whose attempt at giving herself cat's ears had instead produced something that looked worryingly like a cabbage. She corrected the wand angle without comment, moved on, past Parvati Patil's surprisingly competent attempt, and then stopped. Harry Potter was sitting at his desk with his wand pointed at his own forearm and a look of mild, detached concentration on his face, the look of someone doing something slightly tedious rather than something that required genuine magical effort. His left forearm had developed a faint dusting of scales, iridescent green-black, that caught the light when he turned his wrist. That wasn't the problem. The scales were actually quite well done. The problem was the magic itself. McGonagall had been teaching for over 30 years. She had, in that time, developed a sensitivity to magical output the way a musician develops sensitivity to pitch. It was unconscious, background, the kind of thing that rang wrong before you could articulate why. Harry's magic had always felt muffled to her. She'd attributed it to the Dursleys, to inconsistent training, to the psychological weight of being the boy who lived and everything that came with it. But she was watching him now, watching the scales shimmer on his forearm, and what she was feeling from him was wrong. Not muffled. Not suppressed. Actively held down, the way you hold down the lid of a pot that's trying to boil over. She pulled up a chair and sat beside him, which was unusual enough that Lavender and Parvati both glanced over immediately. Harry looked up, scales still spreading slowly across his wrist. "Potter," she said, keeping her voice professionally neutral. "How much effort is this requiring?" He blinked. I don't know. Not much." "Why? Is it not good enough?" "The scales are fine. Answer the question honestly." He looked at his arm. "Maybe a 3 out of 10. It started at about a 5 and got easier." McGonagall looked at the scales again. This was intermediate-level partial transfiguration. It should be requiring a solid 7 out of 10 from a fourth-year student, more from most of them. Even gifted students rarely found it easier as they went, the fatigue compounded. "I want to try something," she said. "Hold still." She drew her wand, not dramatically, just efficiently, and cast a diagnostic charm, the standard educational one, the kind she used to check for charms that might be interfering with a student's spell work. She'd used it on a third year last November who couldn't manage a basic color change, and found she'd been accidentally hit by a confundus during a Quidditch match and never shaken it. The charm hit Harry in a pale wash of amber light, and then nothing happened for a moment, and then McGonagall's blood went cold. The amber light fractured. Not fractured like a failed spell. Fractured like light hitting a prism, splitting into dozens of directions, each thread finding something, latching onto it, illuminating it. She hadn't seen anything like it in 30 years of teaching. The threads kept multiplying, each one a separate enchantment, each one seated differently, layered at different depths, some old and calcified and some newer, and they were everywhere, woven through his magical core, settled into his neural pathways if you could call them that, tangled around the architecture of who this boy believed himself to be. Harry was watching her face. He'd gone still, the scales forgotten. "Professor?" "Don't move," she said, and her voice came out very level, which was its own kind of tell. Minerva McGonagall's voice only went that level when she was working very hard not to let it do something else entirely. She cast again, this time the full diagnostic. The comprehensive one, the one healers at St. Mungo's used. It wasn't standard classroom use. She didn't care. The results came back as a soft constellation of golden text, suspended in the air between them, visible only to the caster. She read it once. Then she read it again. 89 active compulsion charms. 89. Graded by depth and potency, layered across a period of, she checked the dates, 13 years. The oldest ones were from when he was barely 18 months old. Her hand was very steady on her wand. She was extremely proud of that. She cancelled the diagnostic with a flick and stood up. "Class," she said, in the tone that brooked absolutely nothing. "Pack up. You're dismissed. Mr. Potter, stay where you are." There was the usual shuffle of confusion and half-hearted protest, but the tone worked its usual magic and within 90 seconds the room was empty. The door swung shut. The lock engaged automatically, old habit, old wards, the room responding to her magic the way it always did. Harry was still sitting at his desk, forearm half-scaled, watching her with eyes that were suddenly very alert. She'd seen that look before on students who were bracing for punishment they didn't think they deserved. The resigned defensiveness of a boy who'd learned early that adult attention usually meant trouble for him. That observation, combined with everything else, made her feel something very specific in her chest that she declined to name at the moment because she had work to do. She pulled her chair around to face him properly and sat down. "Harry," she said, and his eyes flickered slightly at the name. She rarely used it. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, and I promise you that whatever your answer is, you are not in trouble." He watched her. "Okay. Have you ever had a full magical diagnostic performed on you? By a healer, or by anyone?" "I don't think so. Not that I know of." "Has anyone ever mentioned anything about restrictions on your magic? Or compulsions? Or any kind of charm being placed on you?" His brow furrowed. "Genuine confusion," she noted, "not performance." "No. What's going on?" She looked at him for a moment. This was the part where a lesser educator might soften it, couch it, hedge it into meaninglessness. She decided he deserved better. "I ran a diagnostic on your magic. I've just found 89 compulsion charms active on you simultaneously. They've been layered on since you were a year and a half old." The silence stretched for about 3 seconds, which was how long it took for the information to land. 89, Harry said. "Yes." "Compulsion charms?" "Yes." "On me?" "Yes." He looked at his half-scaled forearm. She watched him process it, watched something move across his face that she couldn't quite read. It wasn't panic, and it wasn't anger, not yet. It was something more fundamental than that. The expression of a person who's just been handed a fact that retroactively rewrites everything they thought they understood about their own life. "What do they do?" he asked. His voice was steady. Steadier than she expected. "I haven't done a full analysis yet. She paused. "I'd need a more comprehensive scan, and I'd need your permission to conduct it, and Harry, I want you to understand that you do not have to do anything I say. You're not required to let me scan you, you're not required to do it," he said. She looked at him. "Do the full scan," he said. "I want to know." She held his gaze for a moment, looking for the compulsion in that response. Was that easy compliance one of the 89 at work? She couldn't know, not yet. But there was something in his eyes that felt genuine. Demand, almost. The look of someone who has always suspected something was wrong and is finally being told they were right. "All right," she said. "This one will take about 20 minutes, and it may be uncomfortable. Lean back in the chair." He did. She stood and walked a slow circle around him, her wand moving in long, precise arcs, the diagnostic weaving itself around him like a second skin. He sat still throughout, that patient, uncomplaining stillness that she'd always found vaguely heartbreaking in him and now found, with everything else, actively enraging. The text came back in columns. She read it standing behind him so he couldn't see her face. Compulsion Cluster 1, Passive Submission to Authority Figures, 13 Charms, oldest dated October 1981, newest July 1993. Effect, automatic deference, difficulty refusing direct requests from adults, significantly suppressed instinct to question or challenge. Compulsion Cluster 2, Emotional Suppression, 11 Charms, spanning 1982 to 1994. Effect, reduced capacity for anger expression, dampened response to injustice, elevated tolerance for physical and psychological mistreatment. Compulsion Cluster 3, Self-Sacrifice Orientation, 9 Charms, 1985-present. Effect, compulsive prioritization of others' well-being over self-preservation, belief that personal suffering is less significant than others. Compulsion Cluster 4, Magical Output Suppression, 17 Charms, 17, the largest cluster, 1981 to 1994. Effect, active cap on magical power output, limitation of accidental magic response, dampening of magical core development. Compulsion Cluster 5, Loyalty Anchoring, 8 Charms. Effect, specific anchored loyalty directed toward, she stopped. Read it again. Looked up at the ceiling for a moment. Looked back down. Directed toward Albus Dumbledore, active compulsion to perceive him as trustworthy, parental figure, beneficent authority. Compulsion Cluster 6 through 12, Various. Reduced academic ambition, dampened social aggression, suppressed instinct to seek legal or institutional recourse for mistreatment, elevated tolerance for fear, she stopped reading. She stood behind him and looked at the columns of golden text and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not simple anger. Something older and colder than that. Something that wanted to break things. What does it say? Harry asked. She walked around and sat back down in front of him, and she was very grateful that her face worked the way it did, composed, precise, all the feeling where it was supposed to be, which was somewhere below the surface and contained. It's going to take me some time to compile a full analysis, she said. But I can tell you the broad strokes now, if you want them. Yes. She told him. She didn't soften it. She went through each cluster methodically, watching his face the whole time, tracking his responses. He listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened at Cluster 4, the magic suppression. His hands gripped the edge of the desk at Cluster 5. Loyalty anchoring, he repeated. Yes. Toward Dumbledore. She met his eyes. Yes. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that's why it's always felt, when I think about him, there's this, I always thought it was just respect. Because he's Dumbledore. I know, she said quietly. But it wasn't real. Your feelings are real, Harry. They're yours. But they were shaped. He looked at his hands. His knuckles were white against the edge of the wood. Can you take them off? That's a more complicated question than it might seem. Removing 89 layered compulsion charms from a developing magical, can you do it? She held his gaze. I'm not sure I should be the one to do it. The safest removal would be done by a specialist at St. Mungo's, with a full, if you take me to St. Mungo's, Dumbledore will know within the hour. He said it flatly. Not a guess. A certainty, and the certainty itself was evidence of something, even through the loyalty compulsion, some part of him understood the shape of the cage he'd been in. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was doing something complicated through the window, casting long shadows across the rows of empty desks. She had been teaching for 32 years. She had sat in staff meetings and smiled at Albus and trusted him and deferred to him and, God, she'd sent this boy back to those people every summer. Every summer for 4 years. She'd known the Dursleys were unkind. She'd watched from across the street on the day Albus left him there, and she'd had doubts and she had pushed them down. She had not put the compulsions on Harry Potter. But she had been a supporting architecture of the world that kept them in place, and she would carry that for the rest of her life. "I can do it," she said. "It will take time. It won't be pleasant. And I need you to understand that when they come off, you may feel very different. You may feel things you haven't felt before, or feel familiar things at unfamiliar intensities. Your magic there may be a significant reactive surge." Harry looked at her steadily. "Will I be more myself?" The question sat between them, clear and devastating. "Yes," she said. "You'll be more yourself. Then do it." She transfigured the desk chair into something more like a recliner, wider, padded, positioned to absorb impact if his magic reacted the way she thought it might, and she drew her wand, and she started. The minor ones came first. That was the right approach, like pulling stitches from the outermost layer before going deeper. The passive submission cluster responded almost immediately. She could feel them, each one, the way you feel a splinter when you finally get the grip right, and she drew them out one at a time with careful, precise countercurse work. Harry flinched at the third one. His fingers curled against the armrests. By the seventh, he'd made a small sound that she refused to characterize as anything other than what it was, which was pain. "Tell me if you need to stop," she said. "Keep going." The emotional suppression cluster was worse. Those had been there longer, some of them, settled into the deeper architecture of who he was, and when she pulled them free the release was, it filled the room, actually, a wash of heat that lifted several papers from her desk. He went very rigid, jaw clenched, breathing controlled and deliberate. "Harry. I said keep going." She kept going. The self-sacrifice cluster made him laugh, brief and surprised and slightly unhinged, when the last one pulled free, a laugh that cracked in the middle and was probably multiple things at once, none of them funny. The magic suppression cluster took 45 minutes. 17 charms, each one seated deeper than the last, each one connected to the others in a web that she had to dismantle carefully, the way you remove bricks from an arch without bringing down the structure. His magic pushed back against her at first, not directed at her, just reactive, the pressure of something long compressed beginning to release, and she had to steady herself 3 times and once had to reinforce the wards on the room because a window cracked. By the end of it, Harry was gripping the armrests hard enough that she was glad she'd transfigured them to be solid oak. His face was flushed, his eyes were bright, and the air around him was doing something she'd only seen a handful of times in 3 decades of teaching, a faint shimmer, like heat haze, like the space around him was adjusting to accommodate something larger than it was used to. The loyalty cluster last. She hesitated over those. "Those two," Harry said, and he was watching her face, had evidently read her hesitation. "All of them. When these come off, your perception of Dumbledore will change. The warmth you've associated with him, get them off me," he said. "Not angry, exactly. Just absolute." She got them off. The last compulsion charm dissolved at 4:47 in the afternoon. She knew the exact time because the clock on the wall stopped briefly, a small physical ripple from the magical discharge in the room, and then restarted. Harry sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then he breathed out, long and slow, and McGonagall watched him settle into himself the way water settles after you stop disturbing it, finding its own level, occupying the space that was always meant to be his. He didn't look fragile. She'd expected fragile. What he actually looked like was landed, like a person who has been standing at a slight angle their entire life and has finally found the floor to be actually flat. He looked at his hands. "Huh," he said. "Harry. I can feel it." He turned his hands over, looking at his palms. "I can feel the difference. It's like," he stopped. Searched for the word. "Like when you've been holding your breath and you don't realize it and then you breathe and you think, that's what breathing feels like. That's what this is." Your magical core is going to take some time to fully decompress, she said. You shouldn't attempt any significant magic today. The reactive surge may be. He raised his right hand, pointed 2 fingers at the far wall, and the window that had cracked earlier repaired itself with a clean sound. The glass flowed back together like water in reverse. The whole thing took about 1.5 seconds and he hadn't even used a wand. McGonagall looked at the window. Then at him. I said today specifically, she said, keeping her voice very dry. Because I was trying to be cautious. It didn't feel like anything, he said, and his voice had a note of wonder in it. It didn't feel like, I've always had to push so hard. Even simple spells, I'd have to push and it would come out small and wrong, or it'd come out big and unpredictable and I'd get in trouble for it. That felt like, he snapped his fingers. Like that. Nothing. Yes. Well. She stood up from her chair, and she moved to her desk because she needed a moment where her back was to him. She collected herself. That's what your magic feels like without 17 suppression charms on it. She heard him shift in the chair behind her. Heard him stand up. Professor. His voice was different. She'd noticed it gradually, through the removal, but now that he was up and standing and speaking at full volume it was distinct, the same voice, the same inflection, but without a particular quality it had always had. She'd always registered it without naming it, that quality. The slight tentativeness, the reflexive apology underneath the words. It was gone. In its place was something quiet and direct. I want to know who put them there. She turned around. He was standing in the center of the room, and the light was doing the shimmer thing again around his edges, and he looked like a boy who had just grown 2 inches without moving. The magical signature, she said. I took a full record of it. I haven't yet, I need to compare it against. She stopped. She looked at him. She had been comparing it against her internal record since the moment she'd first seen the fracturing amber light. She'd known since the 5th cluster, really. Possibly since the 3rd. I need to do a formal comparison. I need it to be documented properly, with witnesses, so that it, McGonagall. She looked at him. Who was it? The afternoon light had shifted to something more like evening. The shadows in the room were long and quiet. The primary signature across all 89 charms, she said, belongs to Albus Dumbledore. Harry nodded slowly. The kind of nod that means I knew before I asked, and the knowing was the worst part. All 89, he said. The signature is consistent across the full span of 13 years. There are minor variations as the style evolved, which is normal for any practitioner's work, but the core magical fingerprint is unambiguous. So he's been, since I was 1.5 years old. Harry's jaw worked briefly. Since just after my parents died. Before he left me at the Dursleys. It appears so. And nobody, he stopped himself. Shook his head. Started again. What happens now? She looked at him, and in that moment she made a decision that she had been, if she were honest, building toward for 4 years. The decision to stop being a supporting architecture. To stop being the person who filed her doubts in the cabinet marked Trust Albus and moved on. I'm going to the Board of Governors tonight, she said. I'm presenting the diagnostic record as evidence of a criminal enchantment on a minor. I'm also going to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement first thing tomorrow morning. You are not going back to your dormitory alone tonight. I'll be arranging alternative. I don't need to be wrapped in cotton, he said, and there it was, the first flash of something sharp, not rude, not aggressive, but direct in the way he'd never been with her before. I appreciate what you did. I do. But I'm not going to sit in some room and wait. I'm not suggesting you wait, she said. I'm suggesting that until we understand the full scope of what's been done to you and who is aware of it, moving carefully is the intelligent choice. You are, as of this afternoon, significantly more magically powerful than anyone currently knows, and you have information that could destroy one of the most powerful wizards in Britain. I need you to understand the weight of that." He looked at her steadily. She held it. "I understand the weight of that," he said. "I'm not afraid." She believed him. That was the thing she couldn't get around. She looked at him and she believed him completely, and she was used to students claiming bravery, and this was something different from that. He wasn't claiming anything. He was just telling her a fact. "All right," she said. "Then let's talk about what we do next. Sit back down, and this time I'm going to make the chair decent because we may be here a while." He sat. She transfigured the chair into something properly comfortable, high-backed, deep-cushioned, and then, because it felt right and because he'd been through something that deserved more than a conjured biscuit, she summoned tea from the staff room. 2 cups. Strong, no ceremony. She sat across from him and she said, "First priority is documentation. I will make 3 independent copies of the diagnostic record, each sealed with unbreakable charms, and I will deliver them to 3 separate secure locations before midnight. That ensures that even if someone," she was careful here, very precise, "even if someone attempts to suppress this evidence, copies will exist." "Who are the 3 locations?" "Good." He was thinking in terms of logistics. "Gringotts, because the goblins answer to no one and dislike Dumbledore personally. The Board of Governors, specifically Griselda Marchbanks, who is on the record as disagreeing with Albus on matters of student welfare. And my own personal storage vault, which is warded with protections that predate Hogwarts itself." Harry was quiet, turning his teacup in his hands. "What's in my Potter vault?" She looked at him. "I'm not certain of the full contents. Your family's solicitors, and Harry, you do have solicitors, you have an entire Potter estate that has been in legal suspension pending your majority, which is itself something that should be examined. Can I access it now? As the last living Potter, you have the right to access the estate at any point." The suspension was administrative. Whether it was, she paused. Whether it was legally imposed or whether it was another quiet manipulation, which was a different question and one she didn't have an answer to yet. "You'd need to go to Gringotts." "Tomorrow," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Tomorrow," she agreed. He drank his tea. She drank hers. The room was settling back into quiet, the shimmer around him fading as his magic found its equilibrium, and in the ordinary light he looked like an ordinary 14-year-old boy sitting in a Transfiguration classroom after hours. Except that he wasn't. She'd known for a while that he wasn't ordinary, but she'd attributed it to the Horcrux and the prophecy and the weight of his history, and none of those things were wrong, but they weren't the whole truth either. The whole truth was that Harry James Potter, under 13 years of compulsion, had still managed to be extraordinary. She did not want to let herself think about what he was now. "My parents," he said, and his voice was careful. The loyalty compulsion, it was pointed at Dumbledore. Was it also pointed away from? "I don't know," she said honestly. "The charms don't work that simply. But the cluster that suppressed your emotional responses would have. It's possible that your grief for them, she chose words carefully. Your ability to feel the fullness of losing them was affected." He was quiet. "Or it may not have been. I don't want to tell you what you felt or didn't feel." "No," he said. "I know. He looked at his hands again. "I was always told I was too young to remember them. But I remember the green light. I've always remembered the green light." She said nothing. Sometimes saying nothing was the right thing. "Do you know if they knew?" he asked. "If they knew what he was doing?" "I don't know," she said. "But I intend to find out." He looked at her, and for just a moment something moved across his face that was young and raw and had nothing to do with power or strategy. Then it settled and he nodded. "Okay," he said. "We find out." They sat for another half hour, working through the immediate plan. She would handle the documentation and the initial legal filing. He would return to Gryffindor Tower, tell no one what had happened tonight, not because he was hiding, she emphasized, but because information this volatile needed careful timing to be useful. Tomorrow at first light, she would accompany him to Gringotts. She would not tell Dumbledore anything. That was the part that sat in her chest like a stone, because she had told Albus things for 30 years, had been his deputy for 20, had trusted his judgment even when it chafed against hers. The stone was there because of the weight of it, not because of doubt, not anymore. The diagnostic record was unambiguous. 89 charms. 13 years. The signature unmistakable. She was angry in the way that people who have believed deeply in something become angry when that thing is revealed to have been hollow at the center. It was a particular, very cold kind of anger. It would be useful. When Harry stood to leave, she said, "Harry." He stopped in the doorway. "I want to be clear about something." He turned. "What I did today, the scan, the removal, I did it because I was obligated to, as your head of house and as a witch who found evidence of a criminal act against a student in her care. That's one reason." She paused. "The other reason is that I have sat in this school for 4 years and watched you survive things that would have broken most adults, and I have not done enough. So I'm doing this now." He looked at her for a moment. She held his gaze without blinking. "Thank you," he said, and the directness of it, no performance in it, no reflexive embarrassment, that was new too. That was him. The door closed behind him. She listened to his footsteps in the corridor, steady, unhurried, until they faded. Then she sat back down, pulled out a fresh piece of parchment, dipped her quill, and began writing. To Griselda Marchbanks, Senior Member, Board of Governors, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, I am writing to you in your capacity as a former Chief Examiner of the Wizarding Examinations Authority and as a board member with a documented record of impartiality in matters concerning student welfare. I am in possession of evidence of a serious criminal act committed against a minor currently enrolled at Hogwarts. The nature of this act, the identity of the perpetrator, and the duration over which it was committed constitute, in my professional opinion, one of the most significant abuses of magical authority I have witnessed in 30 years of educational practice. I require your assistance, and I require your discretion. I will come to you tonight. Yours, Minerva McGonagall. She sealed it, spelled it to open only for Marchbanks's touch, and sent it off with the school owl before she'd had time to second-guess herself. Then she pulled out a second sheet and began the full documentation of what she'd found, not for the file she'd deliver tonight, but for herself. So she wouldn't forget any of it. So it was all real on paper in her own handwriting. She wrote for an hour and a half. When she finished, her hand was cramping and the ink on the first page had dried to something dark and certain, and she had 13 pages of the most damning professional document she'd ever produced. She sealed it with 7 different wards. Outside, the sky over the Forbidden Forest had gone from purple to black, and somewhere in Gryffindor Tower a 14-year-old boy was sitting in a room full of people who loved him and feeling, for the first time in his life, the unmedicated, uncompelled, unconstrained weight of who he actually was. She thought he'd probably be awake all night. She thought that was probably right. Across the castle, in the circular office at the top of the tallest tower, a silver instrument that had been spinning peacefully on its perch for 13 years gave a soft chime, produced a small curl of smoke, and fell still. Albus Dumbledore looked up from the letter he was writing and regarded it for a long moment. He did not look alarmed. He did not reach for his wand or rise from his chair. He simply set down his quill, removed his half-moon spectacles, and rubbed the bridge of his nose with the thumb and forefinger of his right hand, the gesture of a man recalibrating. "Ah," he said softly, to no one at all. He sat in the silence of his office for a long time after that. The portraits on the walls dozed. The sorting hat slumped. The other instrument spun on, indifferent. Outside, Fawkes made a low sound from his perch, something between a note and a question. Dumbledore didn't answer. He picked up his quill and drew a new piece of parchment toward him, and he began to write in a hand that was careful and considered and gave nothing away. Chapter 2, what the heir remembers. Harry didn't sleep. He lay on his back in the dark of the fourth-year boys' dormitory and stared at the canopy of his bed and listened to Ron snore and felt everything. That was the thing about it, the feeling. He'd spent 4 years at Hogwarts assuming that the emotional flatness was grief, or being British, or just the particular texture of being Harry Potter, who had too much to worry about to feel things properly. Now he understood it was none of those things. It was 13 charms working in concert to make sure he didn't feel things that would make him inconvenient. He felt them now. All of them. At once. The anger about the Dursleys came first, not the usual dull burn he'd carried for years, the kind he'd learned to bank and ignore, but something real and sharp and enormous. 3 weeks of a summer, every small cruelty and large one, every cupboard and locked door and deliberate forgetting, and all of it had happened because Dumbledore had pointed him there. He'd always accepted the Dursleys as a kind of weather, bad, inevitable, not worth fighting. He understood now that the acceptance had been manufactured. Then the grief for his parents arrived, and that one actually made him sit up in bed because it hit with a force that suggested it had been waiting for years. Not the abstract grief he'd always carried, the second-hand kind, made of photographs and other people's stories. Something rawer than that. 2 people who had loved him enough to die for him, and he had been chemically prevented from feeling the full depth of losing them. That felt like a second theft. More personal, almost, than the first. He got up before 5. The dormitory was still dark. He dressed quietly, took his wand, and went down to the common room. He sat in the chair nearest the fire, which had burned down to embers, and he held his wand loosely in his hand, and he did something he hadn't tried in a long time, he simply let his magic do what it wanted. The embers brightened. The fire built itself back up, no charm, no word, just his attention settling on it. The temperature in the room rose a few degrees. One of the decorative cushions on the sofa across from him drifted 6 inches to the left, as if making room for something. He thought, this is what I'm actually like. He was still sitting there when the portrait hole swung open at 5:30 and Hermione came in already dressed, hair imperfectly tamed, a book under each arm. She stopped short when she saw him. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep." She came and sat in the chair across from him, tucking her feet underneath her in the way she only did when she thought no one was watching. She looked at him with the specific Hermione look that meant she was deciding whether to ask or wait. He said, "Something happened yesterday. I'll tell you everything, but not yet. Today. Tonight, maybe." She considered this for a moment. The fire crackled. "Are you all right?" He thought about it honestly, which was itself new. The compulsion to say fine reflexively had been part of the second cluster, he was fairly sure. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I think I'm going to be." She nodded, which was the thing he appreciated most about Hermione in this moment. She didn't push, just accepted the answer, opened the larger of her 2 books, and started reading. The fire between them was warm. The castle was quiet. He thought about Dumbledore sitting in his tower right now, and the image arrived without the warmth that had always accompanied it before. Without the compelled comfort. Just a very old, very powerful man who had been controlling him since before he could walk, and who was probably already thinking about what to do next. Harry turned this over in his mind for a while. Then he thought, I'd better think faster. McGonagall was waiting outside the portrait hole at 7:15, dressed impeccably, looking like she'd been awake all night and had decided to make that fact irrelevant by sheer force of personal standards. She'd clearly not slept either. The set of her jaw said she'd made good use of the time. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes." He stepped out. "Hermione and Ron?" "Not yet. I'm going to tell them today." She considered this briefly. "Granger will be useful. Weasley," she paused in the measured way she did when she was being fair to someone she was uncertain about. "Ron's loyal," Harry said. "He needs to know." "As you like." She walked, and he fell into step beside her, and they moved through the morning castle, which was beginning its early routine of professors and ghosts and Peeves in the distance somewhere breaking something. "I had a productive night," she said, in the tone of someone who had charged a hill and taken it. Griselda Marchbanks has the first copy of the diagnostic record and has placed it in her personal vault. She was, a pause, appropriately horrified, and she is on record as supporting a formal inquiry. "I filed the initial paperwork with the DMLE's after-hours reporting system at midnight. We have a case number." Harry absorbed this. Dumbledore? He knows something has changed. He would have had monitoring charms on you, standard for someone in your situation, ostensibly protective, practically surveillance. When the compulsions were removed, those charms would have registered the disturbance. So he knows. He knows the charms are gone. He doesn't know yet what I know or what I've filed. She glanced at him sideways. He'll work it out. He's not a stupid man. No, Harry said. He's really not. They were in the entrance hall now, and she produced 2 traveling cloaks from nowhere, which was not technically possible unless you'd spent 30 years learning the Hogwarts enchantments well enough to pull items from specific locations in the school at will. She handed one to him. "Gringotts first," she said. "The Hogwarts board can wait until we know what you actually have access to. Resources shape strategy." The morning was cold and bright, the ground still damp, and Harry walked across them without looking back at the castle, which loomed behind them in the early light. He noticed he didn't feel the usual pull back toward it, the anxious sense that he needed to be in it, near Dumbledore, where it was safe. That pull was gone. The absence of it was something. The carriages to Hogsmeade were starting their early runs, and they took one without ceremony, and from Hogsmeade they fled directly to the Leaky Cauldron, McGonagall wrapping the Floo connection with a misdirection charm that she said would log their destination as Diagon Alley generally rather than specifically, and then they were in the familiar cold and gold of Gringotts at 8 in the morning, which was early enough that the Great Hall was quiet, only 3 other customers in it, and the goblins at their counters looked up with the practiced disinterest of people who have seen absolutely everything. McGonagall approached the nearest senior teller, not the closest one, the senior one, and Harry noted that distinction and filed it, and said, in gobbledygook, something that made the goblin look from her to Harry and back again with an expression that on a goblin probably passed for surprise. The goblin disappeared. They waited. The goblin came back with a second one, older, wearing a different grade of uniform, who looked at Harry with what was definitely not disinterest. "Mr. Potter," he said. His accent was precise, slightly formal, the way that people who have mastered a second language sometimes speak it better than native speakers. "I am Sharpclaw. I am the senior account manager for the Potter estate. We have been expecting you for some time." Harry looked at him. "You've been expecting me? Since your 14th birthday, specifically." Sharpclaw glanced at McGonagall, a very considered look. "There are sealed instructions connected to the Potter estate that activate at various points. Your 14th birthday triggered one of them. We were awaiting your visit." "What were the instructions?" "They are for your eyes. Please follow me." They were taken down in one of the carts, the deep levels, Harry noticed, not where he usually went. The temperature dropped. The tunnels were older here, the stone a different color, and the vault they eventually stopped at was not the one he'd been to before, not the small one with the moderate amount of gold he'd grown up assuming was his entire inheritance. This vault was significantly larger and had a door that was significantly more impressive and was protected by, Sharpclaw explained calmly, no fewer than 4 distinct security enchantments including one that responded to Potter bloodline and one that responded to emotional state. "Why emotional state?" Harry asked. "To prevent coercion," Sharpclaw said. "If you were opening this vault under duress, the wards would register it." Harry thought of Cluster 2, emotional suppression, reduced capacity for anger, dampened response to injustice. He thought about whether he would have been able to open this vault 6 months ago. Whether the emotional flatness the charms had given him would have registered as duress to an enchantment sophisticated enough to tell the difference. "Smart ward," he said. "Your great-grandfather was a thorough man." Sharpclaw placed his palm on the door. The 4 enchantments moved through their sequences. The door opened. It was big. That was the first thing. Big enough to walk through comfortably without ducking, and it went back far enough that the far wall was lost in the warm light of the self-illuminating enchantments. There was gold, more than he'd seen in his life, in stacked chests along the left wall, which he noted and then moved past, because what was on the shelves along the back was more immediately interesting. Documents. Sealed ledgers. Locked boxes. A glass case containing what appeared to be a very old family tapestry with the Potter lineage running back further than he could quickly trace. A shelf of wills. And in the center of a small reading table, as if placed there deliberately, a single sealed letter. His name was on it. In his mother's handwriting. He recognized it from birthday cards he'd seen in photographs. Harry. He picked it up and held it for a moment and felt the grief again, that new, real, unsuppressed grief, and then he opened it. It took him 5 minutes to read it. McGonagall and Sharpclaw stood back without comment and let him read it alone. Lily Potter had written it when Harry was 3 months old, with the specific awareness that she might not survive to deliver it herself. It was his mother's voice, which he'd never heard except in Dementor-induced hallucinations, and reading it was the closest thing to hearing it he'd ever had. She was funny, he noticed. Sharp, precise, warm. She called James, your father, who is currently arguing with a clock, in an aside that suggested James Potter's relationship with timekeeping had been lifelong. She described Harry as stubborn, curious, and already demonstrating an ability to make things happen when he wanted them badly enough. Then she described, in 4 careful paragraphs, what she had discovered about Dumbledore's intentions for her son. She had found evidence, she didn't specify how, that Albus intended to manage Harry's development toward a specific outcome. She had confronted him. His explanation had been characteristically calm, characteristically confident, and had boiled down to, the prophecy requires a willing sacrifice, and a child who is wild and powerful and fully himself will not make that sacrifice willingly, so he must be shaped into someone who will. Lily Potter had not accepted this. She had taken legal steps, she named them, precise and documented, to secure Harry's rights through the Potter estate. She had ensured that the estate would wait for him. She had filed a sealed testimony with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement under Bartemius Crouch Sr., then DMLE head, with instructions that it activate on proof of specific enchantments being discovered. She had known. She had known what Dumbledore intended, and she had died before she could stop it, and she had spent her last months building a safety net for her son to land in if the worst happened. Harry read the final paragraph twice. My darling, stubborn, wonderful boy, if you're reading this, it means Albus didn't manage to intercept it, which means the goblins were more reliable than he anticipated, which would have amused your father enormously. I want you to know 2 things. First, you are not a weapon. You are not a sacrifice. You are a person, and your life is yours. Second, you are also, and I say this with every bit of objectivity I can manage, extraordinary. Don't let anyone make you small. Not even in the name of the greater good. The greater good has no right to you that you haven't chosen to give. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. He turned around. McGonagall was watching him with an expression he wasn't sure he'd ever seen on her face before. He thought it might be grief. She knew, he said. I gathered, she said quietly. She filed a sealed testimony with the DMLE. Sharpclaw, the testimony activated at 7:43 this morning, Sharpclaw said, with the air of someone delivering information they had been waiting a long time to deliver. Triggered by the removal of the specific enchantments your mother identified. A copy was automatically forwarded to the current DMLE head, Madame Amelia Bones, under the terms of the filing. It arrived in her office 43 minutes ago. McGonagall made a sharp sound that was probably supposed to be something else. My mother thought of everything, Harry said. Your mother, Sharpclaw said, was one of the 3 most brilliant magical minds we dealt with in the last 50 years, and she was 21 years old when she wrote that letter. If she had lived, he stopped, which was unusual for a goblin, and composed himself. The Potter estate, Mr. Potter. In brief, you hold properties in 3 countries, a significant investment portfolio, several hereditary magical seats on the Wizengamot, and assets valued at approximately, he said a number. McGonagall's composure, which had survived everything so far, flickered briefly. The Wizengamot seats, Harry said, latching on to this immediately. How many? 3. The Potter seat, the Peveril seat which falls to Potter heirs by entailment, and the Gryffindor seat, also by entailment. You are the last of all 3 lines. 3 votes, Harry said. Not to himself, to McGonagall. She caught it immediately, he could see her doing the political arithmetic behind her eyes. 3 confirmed votes in the Wizengamot, she said, for a 14-year-old who has not yet reached majority. Minor heirs can vote through proxy or petition for emancipation, Sharpclaw said. Given the circumstances, we would support a petition for magical emancipation at Gringotts. It would take, he calculated, 48 hours to process. File it, Harry said. Sharpclaw looked at him steadily. The moment that petition is filed, it becomes a matter of public record. Good, Harry said. File it. A very small smile crossed Sharpclaw's face, gone in an instant, the kind of expression that on a goblin meant something significant. As you wish, Mr. Potter. They spent another hour in the vault. Sharpclaw pulled relevant documents and Harry read them, quickly, absorbing the shape of what he had available. McGonagall sat at the reading table and made notes on a small pad she'd produced from somewhere, and she was doing what she did best, sorting, organizing, turning information into strategy. At one point she looked up and said, Sirius Black. Harry looked at her. Your godfather, she said. The Potter will, James and Lily's will, names him as primary guardian and requests that he take custody of you in the event of their deaths. That will has been filed here at Gringotts but was superseded by Dumbledore's placement arrangement. She said the last 2 words very precisely, stripping them of the warmth they'd always had in the official narrative. Black was sent to Azkaban without a trial. I know, Harry said. I know he's innocent. He paused. Last year, we know he's innocent. Pettigrew was the secret keeper. Yes. And Pettigrew is currently at large, which means the evidence to clear Black is a living person rather than a record, which makes it more complicated, but not, she tapped her quill against the pad. Not insurmountable. If we're already going to the DMLE on your case, and if Amelia Bones is already receiving your mother's testimony, we push for Sirius at the same time, Harry said. It would give you a legal guardian who isn't connected to Dumbledore. That changes your situation considerably. She looked at him. I'll be honest, I should be your guardian. I'm your head of house, you're under my care, and I intend to apply for formal guardianship through the school charter's emergency provision. But having Black as well, if he's cleared, you'd both be my guardians? He blinked. Is that objectionable? He thought about it. McGonagall, who was precise and furious and had spent an entire night documenting evidence of crimes against him. Sirius, who last year had been the first adult in his life who'd felt like his adult. No, he said. That's not objectionable at all. She nodded briskly and wrote something down. They were back in Hogsmeade by 11, and by noon they were back in the castle, and by 12:15 Harry was in the Gryffindor common room with Ron and Hermione and he told them. He told them everything. He told them straight through, no softening, no hedging, the scan, the 89 charms, the removal, the clusters and what each one did, Dumbledore's signature, the vault, his mother's letter, Sharpclaw, the Wizengamot seats, the emancipation petition, Sirius. He told them in 20 minutes, sat on the sofa with his elbows on his knees and his voice level and direct. When he finished, Hermione had both hands pressed flat against her thighs and was staring at him with a look he recognized from watching her do very hard maths. Ron had gone through about 14 distinct facial expressions during the telling and was currently somewhere between furious and unsettled. 89, Hermione said. Yes. And the signature, you're certain it's been verified? The comparison was documented? McGonagall has 3 independent sealed copies of the full diagnostic record and so does Griselda Marchbanks. Hermione was quiet. He could see her doing it, the thing she did with information she didn't want to be true, which was to examine it from every angle looking for an alternative explanation, not out of dishonesty but out of intellectual rigor. He watched her not find one. He put them there because of the prophecy, she said. Not a question. Working through it aloud. He wanted me shaped into someone who'd sacrifice himself willingly, Harry said. My mum figured it out before she died. Hermione made a sound that was too compressed to be what it probably wanted to be. She was holding something in very tightly. Hermione, Harry said. It's okay to be angry. I'm not angry, she said, and then immediately, I'm furious. She looked up at him, eyes bright. I've quoted him. I wrote essays about his philosophy of magical governance. I had. He was the person I pointed to when people said the magical world was all dark and corrupt and backwards. I said look at Dumbledore, look at what he stands for. He does stand for some of it, Harry said. I think that's what makes it complicated. Harry. She leaned forward. That doesn't, I know. I'm not defending him. I'm saying it's complicated so we don't underestimate him. Ron, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, said, my family. He said it the way you say something when you've been turning it over in silence and it's become heavy. My dad and mum, they'd die for Dumbledore. My whole family. The Order of the Phoenix, everything they did in the war, I know, Harry said. And if this comes out, when it comes out. Ron met his eyes. There was something there that was loyalty and grief and conflict all at once, Ron Weasley in miniature, who had always known instinctively how to be a good person but hadn't always known who the good person was in any given situation. Your family's loyalty to Dumbledore was real, Harry said. What they did in the war was real. This doesn't change that. He paused. But I can't let him keep doing what he's been doing because it would upset people. Ron was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate, the nod of someone who has made a decision they know will be costly. What do you need? Harry felt something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with magic. I need you to be exactly who you are, he said. That's all. The afternoon post brought something unexpected. Harry was in the library with Hermione, who had already pulled 4 books on compulsion charm law and was generating a bibliography, when the school owl landed in front of him with a letter sealed in official DMLE blue. He opened it. Mr. Potter, I am in receipt of a sealed testimony from Lily Potter, née Evans, filed in 1981, which activated this morning under the conditions she specified. I am also in receipt of a case filing from Deputy Headmistress McGonagall, time-stamped midnight. I have spent the morning reviewing both. I need to speak with you. This is not a request I am making through official channels, I am making it personally, because the nature of this matter requires discretion that official channels cannot currently guarantee. I will be in Hogsmeade at the 3 Broomsticks at 3 o'clock this afternoon. I expect that a student of your particular history will not have difficulty arranging to be there. Amelia Bones Head, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He showed it to Hermione without comment. She read it and looked up. She's the most incorruptible person in the ministry. I know. She hated that Sirius didn't get a trial. She's been on record about it for years. I know. He stood up, pocketed the letter. Come on. McGonagall, when he found her and showed her the letter, read it twice, folded it precisely, and handed it back without hesitation. "Go," she said. "Take Granger. Don't take the invisibility cloak, go openly. It matters that you're seen moving openly." He went. Amelia Bones was, in person, nothing like what he'd imagined from the name. He'd expected old, given how long she'd been at the DMLE. She wasn't old, late 50s, perhaps, compact and sharp-eyed, wearing a monocle that he'd somehow expected to be intimidating and was actually just practical. She was sitting at a corner table in the Three Broomsticks with her back to the wall and a glass of something non-alcoholic in front of her, and when Harry walked in she looked at him and, he read her correctly, he thought, she was doing what McGonagall had done the first time. Reassessing. "Mr. Potter," she said. "You look different than you did at the World Cup." "I had a productive day yesterday," he said, and sat across from her. Hermione sat beside him, had her notebook already open, which made Bones glance at her with what was clearly approval. "Miss Granger," Bones said. "Top of your year." "Yes, ma'am," Hermione said. "Good. I might need your eidetic recall later." She looked back at Harry. "I'm going to speak plainly, because I don't have time for anything else and neither do you. I have spent this morning reviewing evidence of what is, if it holds up, and I believe it will, the most serious case of magical coercion of a minor in recorded British wizarding history. I have also read Lily Potter's testimony, which is the single most methodical piece of legal documentation I have ever seen from a private citizen, and she was 21 years old when she wrote it." She paused. "Your mother was remarkable." "Yes," Harry said. "She was. Here is my position. I can open a formal investigation under the Coercive Magic Act of 1893. I have the authority to do so unilaterally as DMLE head. The investigation will automatically suspend Dumbledore's authority over you and will trigger a mandatory review of any decisions he made in his capacity as your guardian by appointment." She looked at him steadily. "The moment I open that investigation, Albus Dumbledore will know, and he will begin contacting every ally he has in the Ministry, the Wizengamot, the ICW, and every other institution he's shaped over the past 40 years. He is very well connected." "I have 3 Wizengamot seats," Harry said. A brief, significant pause. "I'm aware. Your emancipation petition was flagged to me automatically, another provision your mother built into the filing. Sharpclaw is efficient." She set down her glass. 3 seats would give you standing to call for a formal inquiry yourself. If you do it before I open my investigation, you control the framing. If I do it first, the Ministry controls the framing. So I should move first, Harry said. "I think you should move very quickly," Bones said. "Dumbledore is going to move too, and he has been playing this game since before your parents were born." "What does he want?" Hermione asked, leaning forward. "I mean, what's his goal now? The compulsions are off. What does he do?" Bones considered this as if she appreciated the quality of the question. "He has 2 options. 1, he comes to Harry, acknowledges what he did, provides an explanation rooted in the prophecy, and attempts to rebuild the relationship on new terms. He would frame it as regrettable but necessary. He would be genuinely remorseful in the way that people who are certain they were right are remorseful, which is to say, apologetic for the upset rather than for the act." "And option 2? Harry asked. "He maneuvers," Bones said simply. "He has been the most politically powerful wizard in Britain for 40 years. He knows how the systems work because he helped build them. He will not be overtly aggressive, that's not his style. He will be subtle. He will suggest that Harry's sudden change in effect and magical output is suspicious, given that we're in a period of rising dark activity. He will question whether the removal of the compulsions was performed safely and by a qualified practitioner. He will wonder, in carefully chosen company, whether Harry is fully himself or whether someone else has interfered." Hermione made a sound. "He'll try to make me look unstable," Harry said. "Or under outside influence," Bones said. Yes. Harry sat with this for a moment. Then I need to do something public, he said. Something that demonstrates I'm coherent and capable and acting of my own will, before he gets to frame the narrative. The Wisengamot, Hermione said, looking up from her notebook. You calling for the inquiry yourself, publicly, with your 3 seats. It's the most legally legitimate thing you can do and it makes you the initiating party. He can't frame you as a victim being manipulated if you're the one holding the gavel. Bones looked at her. How old are you? 14. Stay in school, Bones said, and it took Harry a second to realize it was a compliment. She looked back at Harry. There's one more thing. He waited. Sirius Black. She said it without preamble. I want you to know that I have been uncomfortable with that case for a long time. No trial. Crouch signed the commitment order without a full Wisengamot hearing, which was technically within wartime emergency provisions but was not right. I attempted to review it twice in the last 5 years and was redirected both times through channels I now find, given today's information, suspicious. Her jaw was tight. If you will provide me with a sworn testimony about Peter Pettigrew, your account from last year, with a truth charter attached, I will open a review of Black's case simultaneously with your inquiry. I believe I can have him out of Azkaban within a week. Harry felt something shift in his chest. Clean and sudden, like a window opening. I'll give you the testimony tonight, he said. I'll give you everything. Bones nodded once, the nod of someone who means every small motion they make. She finished her drink and stood, straightening her robes. One more thing, Mr. Potter. She looked at him with the monocle and the sharp eyes and the 40 years of watching the wizarding world be less than it should be. Your mother built you a foundation before she died. A very good one. Don't let anyone convince you to apologize for using it. He met her eyes. I won't. She left. Harry and Hermione sat at the corner table for a moment after the door swung shut behind her. The 3 broomsticks was filling up around them, weekend regulars, the hum of ordinary life. Harry, Hermione said, and her voice was quieter now, just for him. How are you actually doing? Not strategically. Actually. He thought about it. About the anger and the grief and the strange new weightlessness. About lying in the dark listening to Ron snore and feeling things he'd been prevented from feeling for 13 years. About his mother's handwriting on the envelope. I'm fine, he said, and then he stopped, because there it was, the reflex, the automatic fine, and he wasn't sure whether that was the charm or just himself. He thought about it honestly. I'm a lot of things. I'm angry. I'm sad. He looked at the table. I feel like myself for the first time. And I don't entirely know who that is yet. But I think finding out is going to be interesting. Hermione was quiet. Then she put her hand on his forearm, briefly, and said, yes, with a simplicity and a warmth that meant more than most of what people said. They walked back to Hogwarts in the cold afternoon light, and the castle rose ahead of them, vast and complicated and full of people who were going to learn very soon that the world had changed. Harry looked at it and felt no pull, no compulsion, no managed warmth. Just his own clear-eyed assessment of what it was, a place he loved on his own terms, which turned out to be different from loving it on someone else's. High up in the highest tower, a light was on. He noted it. Filed it. Walked through the main doors without looking away. Somewhere in Azkaban, a man with dark hair and hollow eyes and years of Dementor damage woke from a thin sleep, and for reasons he couldn't have explained, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't know what to call it yet. He sat up in his cell and looked at his hands in the grey light and breathed. Chapter 3, The Trial of Albus Dumbledore. The summons arrived on a Thursday. It came by Ministry Owl, not the usual brown schoolpost variety but a large grey bird with an official seal on its leg and the kind of bearing that suggested it had never in its life delivered anything as casual as a birthday card. It landed on the staff table at breakfast, walked past 3 professors who reached for it, and deposited the letter directly in front of McGonagall with the precision of something that had been specifically enchanted to do exactly that. She opened it, read it once, and her expression didn't change in any way that most people would have noticed. Harry noticed because he'd been watching the staff table from across the hall, waiting for exactly this. She looked up and found him immediately. A small nod. He turned back to his eggs. What was that? Ron asked around a mouthful of toast. Our summons to the Wisengamot closed hearing, Harry said. 3 days from now. Hermione set down her pumpkin juice. That's fast. Bones said she'd move quickly. He ate a forkful of eggs. She wasn't lying. It was fast, 6 days since the scan, 4 since their meeting at the 3 Broomsticks, 2 since Harry had submitted his sworn testimony on Pettigrew and his formal petition through the 3 Potter Peveril Gryffindor seats to call for a closed inquiry. The machinery of the Wisengamot was, by any normal measure, glacially slow. Amelia Bones had apparently decided to personally push it with both hands. Ron was looking at his breakfast with the expression he got when something was sitting on him. He'd had versions of that expression for 4 days now, processing, readjusting, conducting private arguments with himself that he refused to involve other people in until he'd reached a conclusion. Harry recognized it and respected it. That was Ron's process. My mum got a letter from Dumbledore yesterday, Ron said. Harry looked at him. She didn't tell me what it said. But she looked like she wanted to cry, and then she looked like she was angry about wanting to cry, so she made bread. She made 4 loaves. He poked at his toast. She only makes that much bread when she's very upset. I'm sorry, Harry said. Not your fault. Ron said it immediately and meant it. "'S not your fault," he said again, quieter, like he was making sure the thought was all the way settled. My mum loves him. She really loves him. He was there after the war, when everything was, she said he was the first person who made her feel like things were going to be all right. Like they'd won and it meant something. He looked up. And I don't know how to tell her that the person who gave her that feeling also, he stopped. You don't have to be the one to tell her, Harry said. When it comes out officially, it comes out. You don't have to carry that. Ron looked at him for a moment. You're different, he said. It wasn't a criticism. Yeah, Harry said. I know. I mean that in a good way. It's like you stopped apologizing for existing. It's good. It's just different. Harry thought about the reflexive fine in the 3 Broomsticks and nodded. Working on it. Across the hall, at the staff table, Dumbledore was eating his breakfast. He looked, from this distance, exactly as he always looked, unhurried, slightly amused by the universe, his eyes doing the half-moon spectacles thing where they caught the light in a way that suggested warmth and wisdom simultaneously. He had not summoned Harry to his office. He had not sent an owl or arranged a meeting. He had, as far as Harry could tell, done absolutely nothing in 6 days. That was, Harry had come to understand, its own kind of move. He looked away from the staff table and thought about what McGonagall had told him last night, when they'd gone over the structure of the hearing. The Wisengamot closed hearings were smaller than the full sessions, no public gallery, a panel of senior members rather than the full body, but with the same legal weight as any official proceeding. Dumbledore, as chief warlock of the Wisengamot, had the right to preside. Except that Dumbledore was the subject of the inquiry. Which meant he had to recuse. Which meant the hearing would be chaired by the deputy chief warlock, Tiberius Ogden, who Bones had described to Harry as fair-minded and unhappy about being put in this position, which is good because it means he'll follow procedure rather than instinct. The hearing was at the Ministry at 2 in the afternoon on Saturday. Harry had been formally registered as the petitioning party. McGonagall was attending as both witness and his nominated adult advocate. Bones would be present in her DMLE capacity. And Dumbledore would be there. Harry sat in the great hall and ate his eggs and thought about seeing Dumbledore across a formal table and felt nothing that the charms had put in him, no manufactured warmth, no compelled trust, no anchored loyalty, and found, underneath all of that absence, something that was entirely his own. He was ready. The night before the hearing, he couldn't sleep again, and this time he didn't lie in bed trying. He got up, dressed, and went down to the room of requirement, which opened for him now with what felt like recognition, the door appearing before he'd finished fully forming the thought. He went in. The room had given him a practice space. Open floor, good light, the faint smell of cool air. He stood in the center of it and held his wand loosely at his side and simply breathed for a moment. Then he started working. Spells he'd learned in class came out different now. Not just stronger, more precise. He cast Reparo on a deliberately shattered practice dummy and the pieces didn't just rejoin, they realigned perfectly, every grain of wood finding its original place. He cast a shield charm and it expanded to fill half the room without effort, dense and layered and translucent gold. He cancelled it and tried a Patronus because he'd been curious, and the stag that erupted from his wand was bigger than he remembered. More solid. It stood in the center of the room and turned its head toward him and he felt it looking at him the way you feel something looking at you that knows you completely. He cast for about an hour, just getting comfortable in his own skin, in the new scale of things. It wasn't about showing off, there was nobody here. It was about learning the instrument, understanding what he was actually working with. A musician who had been playing with 3 strings finally getting access to all of them. At about midnight, the door opened. He turned, wand up automatically, and it was Hermione, still dressed, holding a cup of tea in each hand and looking at the Patronus stag with wide eyes. "I heard you leave," she said. "Sorry." "Don't be." She held out one of the cups. She was looking at the stag properly now, taking it in. "Harry." "Yeah. He's enormous." "I know." Was he always that size?" He thought about the previous times he'd cast a Patronus, corporeal and real, yes, but never like this. This one had depth to it. Presence. "No," he said. "He's new." She handed him the tea. They stood side by side in the room of requirement and looked at the Patronus stag until it faded, which took longer than it should have because he wasn't concentrating on maintaining it and it maintained itself anyway. "Tomorrow," she said. "Today, technically." "Are you nervous?" He considered this honestly. "I'm thinking," he said. "That's different from nervous." She drank her tea. "I went back through 5 years of Wisengamot records last night. The closed hearing format, it's more like a board inquiry than a criminal trial at this stage. Dumbledore doesn't have to prove innocence, and you don't have to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. You just need to establish sufficient grounds for a full formal investigation. The evidence does that." "I know. Bones walked me through it. The tricky bit will be cross-examination. He's going to explain himself. He's going to be very calm about it, and very reasonable, and his explanation is going to have a logic to it that," she paused, frustrated. "His logic is going to make a horrible kind of sense, and some of the panel members are going to find it convincing." "I know," Harry said. "And you can't," she turned to look at him. "You can't just be angry in there. I know you have every right to be. But if you're angry, he wins the room." Harry looked at her. "Hermione." "I know." She held his gaze. Nodded. Sipped her tea. "You're going to be brilliant tomorrow," she said, quietly and with complete certainty. "We're not bringing you," he said. "You and Ron, you'll be in the public record if you're there, and Dumbledore will use that. He'll make it about using my friends as props." "I know," she said, exactly as he had. "McGonagall told me." She looked at the empty center of the room where the stag had been. "I've been preparing you anyway. I noticed." She almost smiled. "Get some sleep," she said. Actual sleep. He got a few hours. The Ministry of Magic on a Saturday morning had a specific character, fewer people than a weekday, the ones who were there moving with either purpose or the look of people who couldn't quite stay away from their jobs. The atrium was its usual impossible grandeur, the fountain its usual complicated symbolism, and Harry walked through it beside McGonagall and felt the space register him differently than it had before. He wasn't sure if it was actually different or if he was just finally noticing what had always been there. McGonagall was in formal robes. Dark grey, precise, a small McGonagall clan brooch at the shoulder that he'd never seen before. She looked like what she was, a senior educator, a formidable witch, a woman who had come prepared. She'd barely spoken since Hogwarts, using silence the way she sometimes used it in the classroom, as a kind of preparation. Bones met them at the lifts. She was also in formal robes, DMLE insignia. She looked at Harry and nodded once. "You're ready," she said, stating it rather than asking. "Yes," he said. "He's already here," she said. "Arrived 40 minutes ago. He's been talking to Ogden." McGonagall's expression didn't change. "Of course he has. Ogden is going to run this properly," Bones said. "Whatever Dumbledore said to him. Tiberius likes his procedural record clean." The lift descended. Harry watched the floors tick by. Level 2. Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Then past that, down further, the old levels where the courtrooms lived in the damp stone deep of the Ministry. He'd been here before, last year, in a different way, pulled into a memory. The grey walls and torchlight and the carved wooden chair with the chains were a particular kind of memory. But that wasn't where they were going. The closed hearing chamber was smaller. No chains, no tiered gallery, no performance architecture. A long oval table with high-backed chairs, 12 of them, 10 occupied by Wisengamot members who were present with the slightly pressured air of people who know they're part of something significant. Torches on the walls, one large window, afternoon light despite the depth of the building, an enchanted window, he noted, showing actual sky somewhere above. He saw Dumbledore at the far end of the table. It was the first time he'd seen him since the removal. Dumbledore was wearing deep blue robes, his silver hair and beard perfectly arranged, his half-moon spectacles catching the torchlight. He looked exactly as he always had, benevolent, considered, slightly above the procedural fuss around him in a way that had always communicated, "I am managing this situation so you don't have to." He had a small pile of notes in front of him, neatly stacked. His hands were folded. He looked at Harry when Harry came in, and Harry looked back. Whatever Dumbledore had been expecting, uncertainty, residual compelled warmth, a 14-year-old who flinched, he didn't show that he didn't find it. His expression shifted only slightly. A micro-adjustment behind the eyes, the look of a very skilled player reassessing the board. Harry found a chair on his side of the table, between McGonagall and an empty seat where Bones would sit after she'd completed her official entry with the panel clerk. He sat down and placed his hands flat on the table and looked at the panel. Tiberius Ogden, in the chair at the head, was a broad-faced man of about 70, with the look of someone who had been doing serious work for a long time and had stopped caring what anyone thought of how he looked doing it. He had a notes pad, a quill, and a gavel, and he rapped it once, just once, with the efficiency of someone who didn't need to do it twice. Closed hearing under the Coercive Magic Act of 1893, convened at the request of Harry James Potter, heir to the Potter, Peveril, and Gryffindor seats, and in conjunction with a formal investigation opened by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement under the authority of Head Amelia Bones, Ogden said, reading from the official opening. The subject of inquiry is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, presently recused from his capacity as Chief Warlock. Mr. Dumbledore is present voluntarily, having declined his right to submit a written response in advance, choosing instead to appear in person. He set down the parchment. Evidence first, then statements. "Mr. Potter, your petition." Harry stood. He'd written this himself, not with Hermione's help, though she'd read it. His own words, in his own order. On the 14th of October, he said, Deputy Headmistress McGonagall performed a diagnostic scan on my magical signature during a Transfiguration class and found 89 active compulsion charms. She has submitted the full diagnostic record, independently sealed by herself, Griselda Marchbanks, and the Gringotts Account Management Division, as evidence to this panel. I won't go through all 89. I'll tell you what they did. He went through the clusters. He was precise, he was direct, and he was not angry. Hermione had been right that anger would lose the room. But he'd also understood something beyond that. He didn't need to be angry. The facts were sufficient. Anger was for when facts weren't enough. He watched the panel members' faces as he spoke. Two of them, older, male, the kind who'd sat in rooms with Dumbledore for decades, kept their expressions carefully neutral in ways that said they were already working out how to receive this. Four others were ranging between disturbed and openly horrified. The remaining three were watching him rather than the evidence, which meant they were assessing him rather than the case, which was its own kind of useful information. He got to the magical suppression cluster, 17 charms, dampening his core since infancy, and one of the previously neutral members, a witch with grey-streaked black hair whose name plate read Marchbanks, and he recognized the name with a jolt of warmth, made a sound and looked down at the diagnostic copy in front of her. The loyalty anchoring cluster, Harry continued, consisted of 8 charms specifically directing compelled emotional attachment and trust toward Albus Dumbledore. I want to be clear about what this means. Every feeling of trust or warmth or parental regard I held toward Professor Dumbledore over the course of my life was shaped and maintained by his own magic. I didn't know this. I couldn't know this, because one of the suppression effects included an active dampening of my instinct to seek legal or institutional recourse. The room was very quiet. The magical signature on all 89 charms, Harry said, belongs to Albus Dumbledore. The oldest charms were placed on the 1st of November, 1981. My parents died on October 31st. Professor Dumbledore placed the first compulsion charms on me the day after he had me placed with the Dursley family, before I was 18 months old. He sat down. Ogden's gavel came down once. Mr. Dumbledore. You've heard the petition. The panel has reviewed the submitted evidence. You elected to respond in person. Dumbledore stood. Harry had been prepared for this. Had spent 3 days preparing for this. He'd asked Hermione what she thought Dumbledore would say, and she'd mapped several scenarios, and Bones had outlined his likely strategic approach. He thought he was ready for it. He found he was still slightly unprepared for how reasonable Dumbledore sounded. I will not insult this panel or Harry by pretending the diagnostic record is inaccurate, Dumbledore said. His voice was its usual register, calm, considered, the voice of a man who has given bad news before and knows that steadiness is a kindness. The charms described are real. The signature is mine. I placed them, and I maintained them, over the course of 13 years. The room shifted. Several panel members had expected denial. The absence of it caught them. I want to begin, Dumbledore said, by saying something clearly and without qualification. I am sorry. Not for what I believed was necessary, I will be honest about that belief momentarily, but for the experience it created. For the limitation of Harry's childhood. For the pain that this revelation has caused, and will cause. He looked at Harry across the table. The blue eyes were genuine. That was the thing Harry kept hitting up against, the eyes were genuine. Dumbledore was not lying about the regret. He actually felt it. In the autumn of 1979, Dumbledore said, a prophecy was made. I will not recite its full content in an open record at this time, its sensitivity remains a matter of active military concern, but its essential meaning was this: a child would be born who had the power to defeat Voldemort, and one of them would have to die at the other's hand. The name made 3 people flinch. I understood immediately what this meant, Dumbledore said. The child described by the prophecy, and I determined it was Harry within weeks of his birth, would have to be willing to die. Not forced. Not compelled. Willing. Because old magic, the deepest magic of sacrifice and love, requires free will to function. Voldemort had been undone by Lily Potter's free sacrifice. The same principle applied. He paused. Tented his fingers. A child who grew up fully aware of his own power, fully expressing his own anger and grief and instinct toward self-preservation, that child would not, at the moment of crisis, choose death. He would fight. He would win, perhaps, or perhaps not, but in either case the sacrificial enchantment would not trigger. Voldemort could not be permanently destroyed. The war would continue, perhaps indefinitely. He looked around the table. I made a calculation. I believe it was correct. You made a calculation, Ogden said flatly. Yes. About a child. About the world, Dumbledore said, very gently. About the lives of everyone in it. Harry's suffering, and I acknowledge it was suffering, against the suffering of everyone Voldemort would have killed had I done nothing. And the magic suppression, said Marchbanks, without looking up from the documents in front of her. The 17 charms limiting his magical core? A powerful child attracts powerful enemies, Dumbledore said. I was protecting, you were protecting your investment, Harry said. His own voice surprised him slightly. Not angry. Level. But it cut the room off cleanly. If I was too powerful, Harry said, I might have solved my own problems. I might have learned enough, grown enough, that when the moment came I might have found another way. You needed me limited. You needed me to feel like self-sacrifice was the only available option. He held Dumbledore's eyes. That's what the magic suppression was for. Not protection. Control. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. A very long moment. You may be right, he said at last, and the admission landed in the room like a dropped stone, and Harry knew from the expressions around the table that Dumbledore had just lost something significant, because he hadn't expected Harry to take him to the actual center of it that quickly. My mother knew, Harry said. She filed a testimony before she died. She confronted you and you explained your reasoning to her and she wasn't convinced. He kept his voice level. She wasn't convinced because she was smarter than the prophecy. Because she understood something you didn't. And what was that? Dumbledore said, and there was something different in his voice now, still calm, still genuine, but with a quality underneath it that Harry recognized as the real version of the man. Listening. Actually listening. She understood, Harry said, that a person can choose sacrifice. A real person, with full knowledge and full power, can look at the situation and decide that dying is worth it. You didn't think I'd make that choice. You didn't trust me to be capable of it. So you manufactured a version of me who would make it involuntarily. He paused. The Dursleys. The charms. The suppression. The loyalty anchor. You built a person who would walk into death because they didn't know how to do anything else. Dumbledore said nothing. My mother died knowing her son was going to grow up with charms on him that would make him submissive to abuse. She died knowing that, and she spent her last months building legal protections for me instead of fighting it because she knew she wasn't going to survive long enough to fight it herself. His voice was still level, but something in the room had changed, a density to the air, and 2 panel members had their hands pressed flat on the table. That's not the greater good. That's a man who decided the ends justified the means and never let anyone question it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Then he said, quietly, I loved you, Harry. I want you to know that. Whatever you believe about the charms, I want you to know that. I know, Harry said. And I don't care. Love doesn't give you the right. The silence that followed had a texture to it. It settled into the room and nobody rushed to disturb it. Ogden rapped his gavel. We'll recess for 20 minutes. Harry stood, moved to the side of the room, took the glass of water McGonagall pressed into his hand, and drank. She stood beside him with her arms crossed and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, very quietly, "Your mother would have liked you very much." He held the glass with both hands and nodded once, and let that sit where it needed to sit. The recess was 20 minutes of Wizengamot members standing in clusters, some of them glancing toward Harry, some toward Dumbledore. Dumbledore spoke to no one. He stood at his end of the table with his notes, apparently reading, but his eyes had stopped tracking the page. He was doing what Harry was doing, thinking. Two of the younger panel members, a witch in her 40s and a wizard who couldn't be much older, came to Harry's side of the room with the specific movement of people who have made a decision during the break. The witch introduced herself as Cassandra Vance, newly appointed to the panel. The wizard was someone named Alastair Fudge, "Not that Fudge," he said immediately, with the look of someone who said it often, a cousin, a distant one, a man who had apparently spent his entire career being annoyed about the confusion. "The magical suppression evidence," Vance said, without preamble. "The 17 charms. What was his output suppressed to?" "According to the diagnostic, to approximately 30% of baseline," McGonagall said, from Harry's left, cool and precise. The comparison was made using his current output as the calibration point. "We estimate his full power is in the 98th percentile range for British wizards." Vance and Fudge looked at each other briefly. "And he's 14, Vance said, not quite to either of them, mostly to herself. "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him properly. "You're very composed for someone in your situation." "I had a good week," Harry said, which was technically true. She almost laughed despite herself, which he thought was probably healthy. When the panel reconvened, the questioning went for another 2 hours. Dumbledore answered everything he was asked, and he never lied, not once, as far as Harry could tell, which was interesting and somehow more complicated than if he had. He explained every charm, dated it, described the reasoning behind it. He was thorough. He was honest in the way of someone who believes their honesty is a virtue even now, even here, and that the truth of his motivations will be understood eventually by people of sufficient wisdom. Some of them were understanding it the way he intended. Harry watched the two older neutral expression members nodding at certain points. Watched them doing the maths of prophecy versus personal freedom, the maths that made sense only if you didn't factor in the lived experience of the person it was done to. When Harry was invited to ask questions of Dumbledore directly, he asked only one. If the prophecy had pointed to a different child, he said, if it had been Neville Longbottom instead of me, would you have done the same to him? The question landed exactly where he'd intended it to. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes, and Harry watched him consider lying, and decide not to, and say, yes. Because it wouldn't have been about me, Harry said. It would have been about the prophecy. It's always been about the prophecy. About the world, Dumbledore said. About the people who would have died. My parents died, Harry said. Because you were the secret keeper candidate Voldemort expected, and you delegated, and Peter Pettigrew was the one who talked. My parents died directly connected to your decisions, and then you put charms on me and left me with people who hated me. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. How many decisions like this have you made? How many people are the acceptable cost of the greater good? Dumbledore did not answer. Which was, Harry thought, the only honest response available. After the hearing, in the corridor outside the chamber, McGonagall steered him to a quiet alcove and stood in front of him and looked at him with the expression that had replaced, over the course of the week, all the careful professional neutrality she'd maintained for years. The expression that was, he'd come to understand, simply what she actually felt. Amelia is calling a vote, she said. On whether to proceed to a full formal investigation. She needs 7 of the 10 present for the threshold. We have Marchbanks, Vance, Fudge, and 3 others who are clear. That's 6. The 2 older members, Runcorn and Dolohov adjacent Fisk, are almost certainly voting against. She looked at him. 2 undecided. Which 2? Ptolemy Abbott, he's been Dumbledore's ally for 30 years, but he also has daughters. What you said about the magical suppression hit him. And Whitmore, who is genuinely undecided in the way that people who are trying to be fair actually are. Harry thought about this for a moment. Abbott, he said. Daughters. Possibly. He thought. Then he made a decision, and walked back toward the main door of the chamber rather than continuing to the lift. McGonagall raised one eyebrow and fell into step. Inside, the panel members were milling before the vote. Ptolemy Abbott was near the window, a man of about 65, heavy-set, with the bearing of someone who had voted on complicated things before and taken it seriously. Harry walked to him directly. "Mr. Abbott," he said. Abbott looked down at him. His expression was unreadable. "I know you've worked with Dumbledore for decades," Harry said, "and I know that what's been presented today is difficult. I'm not asking you to dismiss what he's done for the wizarding world. I'm asking you to consider this." He kept his voice level and direct and gave Abbott the courtesy of not performing emotion at him. "Everything I am, what I'm able to do, who I am when I'm not suppressed, has been myself from the start. The only thing that changed 6 days ago is that I got to start experiencing it. Every child deserves that. Not because it's useful, not because the prophecy requires it, but because it's theirs." He paused. "If it had been your daughters, would you have accepted the calculation?" Abbott was quiet. "Mr. Potter," he said, after a moment. "I have voted on difficult matters for 23 years. He looked at the window. "I have always been able to convince myself that the difficult vote was the right one because greater men than me had pointed to it." He looked back at Harry. "I am reconsidering that process." He walked away. Harry returned to McGonagall's side. "Well," she said, very quietly. "That's all I've got," Harry said. "The rest is up to them." The vote was 7-3 in favor of proceeding to a full formal investigation. Dumbledore, when the result was read, sat very still for a moment. He had known this was a possible outcome, had probably known it was the likely outcome, with Bones running the procedure. He nodded once, which was either acknowledgement or deference or both, and rose from his chair. And then, because he was Albus Dumbledore, he walked around the table toward Harry instead of toward the door. Harry watched him come. Beside him, he felt McGonagall go very still. Dumbledore stopped about 3 feet away. He looked at Harry the way he'd looked at him in the hearing, genuinely, without performance. In this proximity Harry could see that he was old in a way that the performance of his public persona usually obscured. Old and tired and carrying something heavy. "I wanted to give you a chance," Dumbledore said softly. "At life. At victory. I told myself it was about the world, and it was, but it was also, I did not want you to die not having chosen it. I thought if I built the choice into your nature, it would still be a sacrifice. Still be love, in some form." "It wasn't," Harry said simply. "No," Dumbledore said. "I see that now." "You always could have seen it," Harry said. "You just decided not to." Dumbledore held his gaze. Something moved through the blue eyes, and Harry, who had spent years reading those eyes through compelled affection, could finally see it clearly. Not wisdom. Not benevolence. Just a man. Brilliant, committed, deeply flawed, convinced of his own necessity to the point where the conviction itself had become the biggest danger in the room. "What will you do now?" Dumbledore asked. "With the power." "With all of it." "Whatever I choose," Harry said. He walked past him toward the door. McGonagall walked beside him, and in the corridor she produced 2 cups of tea from absolute nowhere, which he was beginning to suspect was her primary coping mechanism for all situations, and handed him one. 7-3, she said. "Yeah. Abbott and Whitmore. Mostly Abbott, I think." She sipped her tea with the expression of someone carefully not saying something gratifying. The full investigation timeline is 3 months minimum. Dumbledore will remain at Hogwarts pending its outcome, suspended from specific administrative authorities over your welfare and your file, but otherwise, I know, Harry said. That's fine. She looked at him. I'm not afraid of him, Harry said. I just needed the room to understand who he is. He looked down the long ministry corridor toward the lifts, toward the way out. Bones said she'd have news on Sirius by tomorrow. She did, McGonagall said, and her voice had something in it that was different from her usual precision. Warmer. The voice of someone who was allowing themselves to feel something good. I believe she will. They walked toward the lifts and Harry held his cup of tea and thought about a man in a grey cell who was going to learn tomorrow that the world had changed, and somewhere in the good anger and the exhaustion and the new clean weight of being himself, he felt something simple and strong. He felt glad. Chapter 4, The Graveyard and the Unchained. Sirius Black arrived on a Tuesday. Not through any official ministry channel. Bones had moved the review fast, but paperwork at that scale had its own gravity and couldn't be wished away entirely. What happened was this: on Monday morning, Bones sent a single owl to Azkaban's administrative warden with a signed order for immediate supervised release pending investigation review, backed by the DMLE authority she had and the sealed Potter testimony on Pettigrew she'd been sitting on since Saturday. The warden, who knew Amelia Bones by reputation and had no interest in being on the wrong side of her, processed it by noon. By Tuesday evening, Sirius Black stepped off a ministry transport at the edge of Hogsmeade and stood in the cold air of early November and breathed. Harry was waiting for him. McGonagall had tried to suggest he wait at the school and let her bring Sirius to him, something about the optics, something about giving Sirius time to adjust, and Harry had looked at her with the particular level patience he'd developed recently and she'd reconsidered mid-sentence and said, right. Fine. We go together. So they were both standing in the cold when the transport landed, and the door opened, and Sirius stepped out. He looked like himself, was the first thing Harry noticed, and then he looked again and understood that what he meant was that Sirius looked like the photographs. The lean, dark-haired man from before Azkaban, with the bone structure that suggested what he'd looked like when he wasn't being eaten alive by Dementors. He was thin, very thin, and there was still something around his eyes that wasn't going to leave quickly, some residue of 12 years of darkness. But he was standing upright and his eyes were sharp and alive, and when he saw Harry he stopped moving entirely for about 3 seconds. Harry closed the distance himself. It wasn't a tentative thing. He walked up to Sirius and the man grabbed him by both shoulders and they stood there in the November wind on the edge of Hogsmeade and something between them just landed. Like two things that were supposed to be connected finally being in the same place. You look different, Sirius said, after a moment. His voice was rough from disuse and something else. From the World Cup. You look, I know, Harry said. What happened to you? I'll tell you everything. Can you walk? Sirius laughed, and the laugh was slightly cracked and slightly too loud and completely genuine. Can I walk? Yes. Yes, I can walk. I've been walking the length of a cell for 12 years, I have excellent walking form. He looked at McGonagall over Harry's shoulder. Minerva. Sirius, she said, in the tone of someone who is very carefully not letting the full weight of their feelings into a single word. You filed the evidence, he said. Bones' letter mentioned you. I filed the evidence, she said. I'm sorry it took this long. He looked at her for a moment, and whatever happened there was private and she clearly didn't want to be watched through it, so Harry turned and started walking toward the castle because forward motion was generally the right response. They took Sirius to McGonagall's office rather than anywhere more public. She had food there, real food, not dramatic, just a solid spread that suggested she'd thought about the gap between Azkaban rations and normal meals and had quietly done something about it. Sirius sat down and ate and Harry sat across from him and talked. He told it the way he'd told Ron and Hermione, straight through, everything, beginning to end. Sirius ate and listened, and his face did things that Harry catalogued and then let go of, because some of them were too big to look at directly. When Harry described the loyalty anchoring cluster, the charms that had pointed Harry's trust toward Dumbledore specifically, Sirius put down his fork and was quiet for about 30 seconds. "He visited me in Azkaban," Sirius said. "Twice. In the first year, before the Dementors got too heavy to think through. He told me he was sorry. He said things worked out the way they had to work out. He looked at his hands. I thought he meant the war. I thought he was talking about James and Lily." He looked up at Harry. "He was checking the charms, wasn't he?" "Probably," Harry said. "He was making sure you were still." Sirius stopped. His jaw worked briefly. "Merlin." "Yeah. I want to have a very loud argument about this," Sirius said. "At some point. In private. Where things might get broken." "That's fine," Harry said. "Not now. Now I want to," he exhaled. "Tell me about what you can do. Tell me about the magic, now that it's," he gestured vaguely. So Harry told him about that too, and Sirius listened to this part differently, leaning forward, eyes bright, the specific enthusiasm of someone who understands what magical core strength means in practical terms and is recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his godson. "James was strong," Sirius said, when Harry described the Patronus. "Really strong. But Lily was something else. Raw magical power, the kind that doesn't run in families, it just appears sometimes. We used to watch her work and James would get this look on his face like," he stopped, smiled at the memory, let it sit. "You've got both of them. Whatever they each were, you've got both." Harry absorbed this. "Can I come to your practice sessions?" Sirius asked. "In whatever room you've been using? I haven't cast a decent spell in 12 years and I need to work back up, and watching you it would help. Calibration. Context." "Yes," Harry said. "Come tonight if you want." Sirius came that night, and the night after, and it became a thing. A routine. Late evenings in the room of requirement, Harry working through what he was actually capable of now, Sirius rebuilding his own craft from the ground up with the patient discipline of someone who understood that 12 years of Azkaban had left gaps and was grimly determined to fill them. McGonagall came twice, watched without comment, and on the second occasion picked up her own wand and demonstrated a transfiguration technique that left both of them staring. "What?" she said, when she caught their expressions. "You're terrifying," Sirius said. "Yes," she agreed, and put her wand away. The Triwizard Tournament had continued through all of this with the slightly surreal persistence of institutional programming, tasks scheduled, champions preparing, the bureaucratic machinery of an inter-school competition grinding forward regardless of what was happening in the legal and magical underbelly of the wizarding world. Harry had not stopped preparing for it. The opposite, if anything. He'd been working on the third task since before the hearing, with a focus and precision that was new but felt completely natural. The maze. He'd been thinking about the maze. Hermione had drilled him on every known creature that might appear in it, using their evenings in the library and then the common room, her voice rapid and precise across a table littered with reference books while Ron played chess against himself at the other end and occasionally offered strategic commentary that was more relevant than it probably looked. Harry absorbed it all and worked through the defensive and offensive options and felt, for the first time regarding the tournament, something that wasn't dread. The morning of the third task he woke up at 6 and lay in bed for about 30 seconds and then got up, because there was no point in lying there. He dressed, went to the room of requirement, and spent 2 hours in exactly the state of clean-focused readiness that he'd been building toward for weeks. Not performance. Not bravado. Just himself, settled and sure. Sirius met him for breakfast. McGonagall had arranged for Sirius to remain at Hogwarts for the duration of the task, technically as Harry's legal advocate, which Sirius had found deeply funny and McGonagall had refused to find funny at all. He sat across from Harry at the Gryffindor table and ate toast with the appetite of someone still making up for years of institutional food. "Ready?" Sirius asked. "Yes," Harry said. "Anything you want to talk through?" "No. I've been through it." He ate. "Cedric's good. Crumb's strong, but he's been off since." He didn't specify what had happened to Crumb in the second task, but Sirius understood from his expression that it was relevant. "And Fleur is brilliant, but the maze will favor containment work over open power, so I think the early portion favors Crumb by default until it gets complicated." Sirius was looking at him the way Harry had noticed him look sometimes, slightly recalibrating, adjusting to the version of Harry that existed now, who was not the nervous boy he'd met through a tunnel floor last year. "You've been thinking about this tactically." "I've been thinking about everything tactically," Harry said. "It turns out I like it. I'm not sure if that's new or just something I never had access to." "James thought tactically on a Quidditch pitch," Sirius said. "Lily thought tactically about everything. You've got both, like I said." The task began at 6 in the evening. The stands were packed: Hogwarts students, Beauxbatons students, Durmstrang students, parents and ministry officials and journalists, the usual architecture of an event designed to be watched. Bagman in the commentator's box, his voice rolling out over the grounds with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who had been doing this for years. Harry stood at the entrance to the maze with the other champions and felt the crowd behind him and ahead of him, the green walls, tall and dense, the hedges woven with magic that he could feel at the edges of his perception now, active enchantments, shifting ones, the maze responding to whoever was inside it. He could feel the shape of it the way he could feel the temperature of a room. Cedric Diggory was to his left, standing with the easy competence of someone who'd prepared seriously and knew it. They'd spoken yesterday, briefly. Harry had told him the maze was more dangerous than it looked, not because of the creatures but because of the cup itself. He hadn't been specific. He'd had a feeling for 3 weeks that something was wrong with the end of this task, the kind of feeling that arrived clean and certain the way things did now when he stopped suppressing his instincts. Cedric had looked at him steadily and said, "You're sure?" "Not exactly," Harry had said. "But enough. What do you want to do about it?" "Get there first," Harry had said. "And find out what's actually there before we touch anything." Cedric had nodded in the slow way of someone committing to something. "Together, then. If we get the chance." The cannon fired. Harry moved. The maze swallowed him, and immediately the sound of the crowd compressed to a distant murmur and then nothing, the hedges rising 6 feet over his head and the light going strange and green-tinged. He stopped walking after his first turn and stood still for a moment with his wand at his side, just listening. Feeling. The enchantments of the maze moved around him like currents, and he tracked them without consciously trying, the way you track the wind when you're flying. He understood the maze had a logic. Not one it would give him easily, but one that was there. He started moving again, and faster than he should have been able to, taking turnings that felt right, correcting twice when the maze shifted and redirected. A boggart appeared at the second junction. He cancelled it mid-transformation with a clean ridiculous before it had finished finding its shape, didn't stop walking. A patch of mist of confundus hung across a corridor. He identified it from the smell and deflected it with a bubblehead charm before walking through, which was faster than going around and required exactly the presence of mind to execute correctly that he apparently now had. He met Cedric at what he estimated was the center-left quadrant of the maze, recognizable by his height and the specific way he moved through the hedges, wary, methodical, good instincts. "You," Cedric said. "Me," Harry confirmed. "You're moving well. You're moving faster than that." He wasn't resentful, just accurate. "What are you feeling up ahead?" Harry turned toward the direction they both knew the cup was. The enchantments were denser there, heavier, the magic of the maze thickening like approaching weather. And underneath it, underneath the standard maze enchantments, something else. Something that wasn't part of any competition. "There's a port key somewhere near the cup," Harry said. "Or possibly the cup itself is one." Cedric looked at him sharply. You can feel that? Yes. Where would a portkey take us? Somewhere we're not supposed to be, Harry said. That's all I know. But someone built it into this task, and it wasn't Bagman. He paused. I think whoever brought Voldemort back the way they brought him back last year, the Death Eaters, the people who came back the moment the war ended, I think something's planned for tonight. Cedric processed this with remarkable steadiness. And we just walk in anyway? I'm going in, Harry said. You don't have to. You just told me someone's planned to use the winning moment to, what? Kill us? Grab us? Grab us, Harry said. Or one of us specifically. He met Cedric's eyes. They want me. They've always wanted me. Right, Cedric said. So the smart thing is for me to go back. Yes. I'm not going back, Cedric said, with complete equanimity. They moved together through the final section of the maze, and Harry worked as he moved, unweaving the enchantments around the cup as they came into sight of it, methodical, pulling apart the portkey connection thread by thread the way McGonagall had shown him to dismantle layered charms. It fought him, slightly. Whoever had constructed this had been skilled and had expected it to work cleanly, had not accounted for someone being able to detect and unravel it while approaching. He got most of it before they reached the clearing. The Triwizard Cup sat on a stone plinth, gold and glowing, legitimate looking in every way that mattered except that Harry could feel what remained of the portkey enchantment underneath it like a tripwire in the dark. It's still partially active, he said. If we both grab it, it might still trigger. I need another minute. Cedric stood with his back to Harry, watching the maze walls. Take your time. Harry worked. The portkey was sophisticated, layers, like the compulsion charms, one anchored to another. He found the anchor point and pressed against it with his magic and felt it resist and pushed harder, and for a moment there was a genuine push and pull, his magic against whoever had constructed this, and he got his first real sense of who had done it. Not Dumbledore. Something darker and less nuanced, the magical fingerprint of someone trained in the old brutal dark arts traditions, someone who had been doing this specific kind of work for decades. Someone's coming through the north wall, Cedric said, suddenly sharp. Harry pulled his wand to the wall without breaking his work on the portkey, two-handed, which was not standard but which he apparently could manage now, and when the hedge opened and Peter Pettigrew stepped through with a cauldron floating behind him and Voldemort's deformed body hanging from his arms, Harry had the man bound before he'd completed his third step. Pettigrew went down like a dropped puppet, ropes snapping from Harry's wand fast and tight. The cauldron crashed. Voldemort's body tumbled to the grass and lay there, small and dark and horrible, and it screamed, a high, thin, furious sound, and Harry crossed the clearing in 4 steps and put a stasis charm on the body with his off hand while he kept his wand hand on Pettigrew. Cedric was staring. The stasis will hold until we get back, Harry said, calmly. The body can't reform without the ritual. No ritual, no Voldemort tonight. How did you? Cedric started. The portkey, Harry said. Pettigrew was going to use it to pull whoever grabbed the cup to the graveyard. Voldemort's been waiting there. He looked at the small dark body frozen in the grass. He's been waiting all year. Cedric turned to look at Pettigrew, who was bound and wide-eyed and making noises into the gag that Harry had added almost as an afterthought. Something shifted in Cedric's face, the confirmation, probably, of everything Harry had told him the day before. That it was all real. That they'd been inside something much larger than a competition. What do we do? Cedric asked. You grab the cup, Harry said. You win. You've earned it, you're ahead on points, it should be you. I'll keep Pettigrew secure while you, Harry. Cedric's voice was firm. I'm not grabbing a cup and walking out while you, Cedric. Harry met his eyes. You winning doesn't diminish anything. And I need to stay with Pettigrew or he'll transform and disappear and Sirius loses his exoneration. That's more important than a tournament. A pause. Cedric looked at him, clearly doing a rapid assessment of whether this was self-sacrifice, the old kind, the manufactured kind, or a genuine strategic call. Whatever he saw in Harry's face apparently answered the question. "Okay," he said. He crossed to the cup and picked it up, and it flared gold, and the champion response magic activated, and Bagman's voice boomed across the grounds announcing Cedric's victory. The maze walls began to lower. Harry kept his wand on Pettigrew and his other hand steady on the stasis charm and waited for the world to come to them. It came quickly. The maze dropping revealed them to the stands, Harry kneeling over two prone figures, one a bound man and one a thing in the grass that nobody at first understood, and then McGonagall was moving through the crowd with a purpose that parted it automatically, and Sirius was behind her, and Dumbledore. Dumbledore stopped at the edge of the now open maze and looked at the scene, and his face did something complicated that Harry, from across the flattened grass, could see even at distance. Harry looked at him directly. Not with anger. Not with the compelled warmth that was gone. With the same level assessment he'd brought to the Wizengamot hearing. "I see you. I know what you did. I'm standing here anyway." Dumbledore looked back. He was the first to look away. Bones arrived from the Ministry within 20 minutes, she'd been attending as an official observer of the task's final stage, which Harry suspected was not accidental on her part. She took one look at Pettigrew, pulled her own wand, and replaced Harry's binding ropes with ministry-grade restraining charms that were specifically anti-animagus, the kind that would hold a rat as thoroughly as a man. "Pettigrew," she said, looking down at him. Her voice was completely flat. "Peter Pettigrew." She looked up at Harry. "How long have you had him?" "About 8 minutes. The body," she said, looking at the stasis-held form in the grass with an expression that was the professional equivalent of what most people would have needed to sit down to process. "That's Voldemort's," Harry said. "Partially reformed through dark ritual. The stasis will hold it, but I can't keep it up indefinitely. You'll want someone who knows dark containment magic." She was already moving, already pulling out her communication mirror, already talking. She worked fast and efficiently, and within another 10 minutes there were 3 more DMLE officers in the clearing and a containment specialist who looked at the stasis field around Voldemort's body and gave Harry a look that was part professional appreciation and part unmasked horror. "How strong is the stasis?" the specialist asked him. "Strong enough," Harry said. "For how long?" "Long enough," Harry said. "Establish your own containment and I'll release mine." The specialist looked at him, then at Bones, who nodded. The specialist set up a containment field that took about 5 minutes, and Harry released the stasis precisely and cleanly, and the specialist's containment took hold and nobody died. Sirius had been standing at the edge of all this with his arms crossed and his eyes on Harry, waiting, with the patience of someone who had spent 12 years learning to wait. When Harry finally walked out of the circle of DMLE activity, Sirius was there. He looked at Harry for a moment. At the boy, the young man, who had walked into a maze that had a murder plot inside it, unraveled the port key while moving, bound Pettigrew, stasis-hexed Voldemort's body, and then calmly directed traffic until the authorities arrived. "Are you hurt?" Sirius asked. "No," Harry said. "At all?" "Not even a scratch." Sirius exhaled. It was a complicated exhale, relief and something else underneath it that was coming to terms with what Harry was now. "James would have been insufferable about this," he said finally. "He would have talked about it for months." "Was he like that? About his own victories?" "Completely. Lily would have been unimpressed by the showing off, but privately very smug." He looked at Harry. "And then she would have gone home and read 6 books about how you did what you just did so she understood the theory behind it." Harry felt the grief that was real and let it be there. Didn't push it anywhere. "Tell me about them," he said. "Later." When all of this, he gestured at the ongoing organized chaos of the DMLE operation around them. "Tell me everything." "Everything," Sirius said, and meant it. McGonagall appeared at Harry's shoulder with the materializing quality she had in crisis situations, as if she didn't walk so much as resolve into existence wherever she was needed. She looked at him from head to toe with the clinical thoroughness of someone checking for damage. "You're uninjured," she said. "Yes." "Pettigrew is in DMLE custody." "Yes." "You unraveled a portkey constructed by a dark arts practitioner while simultaneously detecting an approach through the maze wall and preparing to physically restrain an incoming threat." She said this completely evenly. Then, a pause. How much of that was the power or the preparation? "Both," Harry said honestly. "The power made the detection possible. The preparation meant I knew what to do with it." She nodded, once. "Good answer." She looked toward where Dumbledore was standing, 20 meters away, in a cluster of staff and ministry officials. He was talking to Fudge, the actual Fudge, the minister, who had been in the stands for the final task and was currently doing the thing he did when reality exceeded his preferred narrative, which was to talk loudly about procedure while looking at the floor. Dumbledore was calm. Managing the conversation. Probably managing Fudge specifically. "He's going to try to control this story," McGonagall said quietly. "He'll try," Harry said. "The story is Pettigrew in custody and Sirius's exoneration and Voldemort's body in a ministry containment field. The story doesn't really need a narrator." She looked at him. Something in her expression did the thing it had started doing recently, the thing that was pride and grief and relief all tangled together. She didn't say anything about it. Just straightened her robes and said, "The minister is going to want a statement from you tonight." "I know," Harry said. "I'm ready." He wasn't nervous about Fudge. He'd been thinking about Fudge for a week, about the way the minister operated, the political instincts that had kept him in office despite being exactly as limited as he appeared, the way he'd attached himself to Dumbledore for years and would now have to decide very quickly what attachment was going to serve him best. Harry had decided that Fudge was manageable, not because he was simple, the man was politically shrewd in the way that pure self-interest sometimes produced, but because he would follow the shape of whatever outcome seemed most stable. Give him a stable outcome with himself securely in the narrative, and he would be useful. He crossed the grass toward Fudge and Dumbledore and the cluster of officials, and as he moved he was aware of the stands, still full, the crowd subdued and uncertain, watching the ongoing official activity with the anxious fascination of people who know something has happened but don't yet know what it means. Dumbledore saw him coming. Fudge turned, too, and his expression did the calculation Harry had expected, assessing what posture would serve him best in front of a crowd that was watching. "Harry, my boy," Fudge started. "Minister," Harry said, and the address stopped Fudge mid-sentence because it implied a formality that excluded the "my boy," which was probably what Fudge had been reaching for. "Peter Pettigrew is in DMLE custody. He's been alive since 1981. He was the Potter family's secret keeper, not Sirius Black, and his testimony will confirm the grounds for Sirius Black's full exoneration." He kept his voice measured, public register, the kind that carried to the front rows of the stands without being theatrical. Additionally, a partially reformed body that appears to be Voldemort, 3 people flinched, Fudge went gray, was being brought to the graveyard task site via portkey to complete a dark ritual. The portkey has been neutralized. The body is in DMLE containment. Head Bones is overseeing both. Fudge's mouth moved several times without producing anything. "I wanted to bring you this information personally," Harry said, "and I wanted to be public about it, because I think the wizarding public deserves to hear accurate information immediately rather than after it's been processed." He didn't look at Dumbledore when he said it. He didn't need to. "I'm available for a full statement whenever Head Bones has completed the immediate security assessment. I imagine that'll be within the hour." He turned and walked back towards Sirius and McGonagall, and behind him he heard Fudge begin to speak and begin to find his footing in the way politicians did, reshaping themselves around the new fact, building a position, already deciding how to be the person who was on top of this. That was fine. As long as the facts were already public, Fudge could arrange himself however he liked around them. Sirius handed him a cup of tea that had apparently materialized. He looked at it and then at Sirius with a frown, and Sirius said, "McGonagall taught me the summoning," with complete solemnity. "She taught you the staffroom tea summoning charm?" "She said I needed emergency coping tools," Sirius said, and somewhere in the deepest lines of his Azkaban-worn face something was genuinely laughing. Harry drank the tea. The evening was cold and the grass was damp, and across the grounds the DMLE worked, and the crowd gradually understood that what they had just witnessed was not a tournament event, and the murmur from the stands shifted in character, rising and tightening. Cedric Diggory was somewhere in the official area having the tournament win noted and processed, and Harry made a note to find him tomorrow and have a different kind of conversation, not strategic, just human, the conversation of two people who had walked into something together. The hour Bones needed turned into two, and the statement Harry gave was long and precise and attended by two quick quills from journalists who had been in the stands and were now being given access that the Ministry's press handlers were clearly uncertain about but couldn't revoke without making things worse. Harry told it straight. No dramatizing, no performance, just the sequence of events from the detection of the port key to the binding of Pettigrew to the stasis charm to Bones's arrival. He answered every question directly. He gave them Pettigrew's name, clearly, for the record. He gave them the description of the Voldemort body and the intended ritual in enough detail that nobody who heard him could later claim ignorance of what had nearly happened tonight. A journalist from the Daily Prophet, a woman named Skeeter who had a quill that was writing things he hadn't said, raised her hand and said, "How do you explain the transformation of a 14-year-old into the decisive figure in what you're describing as a potential war-altering event?" He looked at her. He thought about his answer for exactly 1 second. "I'm not 14 in the way you mean," he said. "I'm a Potter. We've been doing this for several hundred years." He could hear Sirius, somewhere behind him, make a sound that he was fairly sure was being suppressed with genuine effort. Skeeter's quill wrote something. He watched it write Harry Potter, Legacy, Power, and the Boy Who Chose. He thought that was, against all odds, an accurate headline. By 10 in the evening, the grounds had cleared to staff and ministry and remaining officials. Harry was sitting on the stone steps at the main entrance of Hogwarts with Sirius beside him and Hermione and Ron across from him on the lower step, everyone in the specific exhausted quiet of people who have been at high intensity for hours and are letting it settle. Ron was, characteristically, the one who finally broke it. "You stasis-hexed Voldemort," he said. "He who, you know who. You just stasis-hexed him. Like a piece of furniture." "He wasn't much bigger than a piece of furniture," Harry said. "Harry. Ron. Ron gestured. His expression was doing the 14 expressions thing again, but this time they resolved faster, and they resolved into something that was essentially just, awe. "You're mental, is what you are." "Thank you," Harry said. Hermione was looking at him with the specific look she had when she was updating her internal model of something. The portkey unraveling while maintaining forward movement and peripheral awareness. "You've been practicing that since the hearing," Harry said. "McGonagall thinks it's called parallel casting. She says it's rare and she was going to warn me it was theoretically possible before I'd been doing it for 2 weeks." "You worked it out yourself," Hermione said, not quite believing. "It felt natural," Harry said. "Like walking and talking at the same time." She wrote something in the notebook she perpetually carried. He didn't ask what. Sirius was looking at the sky. The stars were very clear, cold air, no cloud cover, the kind of night that would have been beautiful anywhere that wasn't recovering from a near-resurrection attempt. "When I was at school," he said, "James had this particular gift for making every situation feel manageable by acting as though he'd already won it. Like the outcome was pre-decided and everyone else just hadn't got the memo." He paused. "I used to think it was arrogance." Another pause. "I think it might be the Potter thing. This, whatever you all carried. Whatever you carry." Harry looked at the stars. "He figured that out, you know," he said, thinking of Dumbledore. That's part of why the charms needed to suppress it. If I'd always felt like I'd already won, I wouldn't have been afraid enough to be managed. And now? Sirius asked. Harry thought about the maze and Pettigrew and the small dark body in the grass and the DMLE and Fudge and Skeeter's quill writing something accurate for possibly the first time in its existence. Now, he said, I know I haven't won yet. I know there's a lot more coming. Voldemort's not gone, he's contained, which is temporary. He looked at Sirius. But I know what I'm doing. For the first time in my life, I genuinely know what I'm doing. The night was cold and the stars were clear, and somewhere in a ministry containment cell Peter Pettigrew was giving a statement that would take away the last piece of false scaffolding from Sirius Black's 12 stolen years. And somewhere in a high office, Dumbledore was sitting with the news that his plan, 13 years of careful management, of shaping and suppressing and steering, had arrived at the exact moment of intended crisis and found Harry Potter standing in its path with his eyes open and his magic unbound, completely certain, completely himself. Looking at the stars, Harry thought, good. Chapter 5, The Fracture Line. The Prophet ran 7 inches on the front page. Not Skeeter, someone else had filed first, a junior reporter named Olsen who apparently had better shorthand and fewer editorial instincts toward embellishment, and whose piece came out clean and factual and devastating in the way that clean facts sometimes are. Pettigrew alive, Black wrongly imprisoned 12 years. Voldemort body contained at ministry. Potter prevents ritual resurrection. The subheadings got progressively less restrained, but the first 3 paragraphs were accurate, which was more than the Prophet usually managed. Skeeter's piece ran on page 3. It was, despite her quill's independent tendencies, also mostly accurate, which suggested she'd understood that this particular story didn't need decoration. She had managed to work in the phrase "the boy who chose twice," which Harry thought was fine. Worse things had been written about him. Ron came down to breakfast holding both pages and set them on the table in front of Harry with the expression of someone presenting evidence. Page 1, he said. I saw it, Harry said. 7 inches. Yeah. Above the fold. Ron. Ron sat down. He poured himself pumpkin juice and drank most of it. My mum sent an owl this morning, he said. She'd seen the early edition. He stopped. Put the glass down. She said she was proud of you, which, he stopped again. She also said she needed some time to think about some things. Which, for my mum, that's big. She's not a think about things person normally. She's a decide and do person. How are you doing with it? Harry asked. I told her what I know, Ron said. Last night, by owl. All of it. I thought, he looked at the table. I thought it was better from me than from the Prophet. She deserved to hear it from someone who, he shook his head. I don't know if I did the right thing. You did, Harry said. It was right. She loves him, Ron said. She's going to keep loving him, probably, even after everything. Because what he stood for in the war was real, even if the other things were, he trailed off, working through it. Both things can be true, Harry said. He was genuinely on the right side of the war. He also did what he did to me. People contain contradictions. Ron looked at him. You sound like Hermione. Hermione's usually right. Don't tell her that. She knows, Harry said, and Ron almost smiled, which was progress. Hermione herself arrived at that moment with the look she'd had since the maze, a focused, slightly accelerated energy, like a person who has been handed an enormous problem and is enjoying the scale of it. She sat down, opened her notebook, and said without preamble, the formal investigation timeline needs to be accelerated. With Pettigrew in custody and Voldemort's body at the Ministry, Dumbledore's necessary evil argument just became significantly weaker. I know, Harry said. His entire defense was structured around the prophecy being real and active and requiring managed sacrifice. With Voldemort contained, he's not destroyed, Harry said. Just contained. The prophecy is still active as far as we know. She paused. True. But the urgency that justified the charms, the argument that extraordinary measures were required in extraordinary times, that argument loses force when the extraordinary time has been interrupted. When it looks manageable. She looked at him. Bones needs to move the full hearing before Dumbledore's legal team finds a way to argue that the changed circumstances justify continuing his authority. I spoke to Bones last night, Harry said. She's already filing for the accelerated timeline. She thinks we can have the full hearing within 3 weeks. Hermione nodded, writing. What about the Wizengamot seats? You haven't formally occupied them yet. Emancipation finalizes today, Harry said. Sharpclaw confirmed last night. After that, the seats are active. She wrote faster. Across the table, Ron watched her with the expression he reserved for Hermione in full operational mode, which was a mixture of awe and the specific affection of someone who loves a person precisely because they're slightly terrifying. The emancipation document arrived with the 11 o'clock post, a thick roll of parchment sealed with Gringotts gold and carrying the official stamp that meant it had been filed with the Ministry's birth registry, the Hogwarts enrollment office, and the Wizengamot administrative body simultaneously. Harry broke the seal, read through it, signed where indicated, and passed it to McGonagall, who countersigned as sponsoring adult. He was, as of 11:47 that Wednesday morning, legally emancipated. A minor in age, a legal adult in magical standing. It didn't feel like anything specific. He'd already felt the shift, days ago, when the charms came off and his own nature had settled back into place. This was just paperwork confirming what had already happened in fact. What it changed, practically, was everything. Dumbledore called no meetings. Sent no owls. Continued teaching Transfiguration, no, that was McGonagall, continued whatever the duties of a headmaster suspended from specific administrative powers looked like. He was present at meals, at staff gatherings, moving through the castle with the unhurried grace of someone who had not lost the thread of their own composure. Harry watched him sometimes from across the great hall with the same clean assessment he'd had since the hearing and found him, consistently, doing the same thing back. They hadn't spoken privately. There had been one moment, in the corridor outside the headmaster's office on the Thursday after the maze, where they'd been walking toward each other and the castle's geometry had resolved them into the same narrow hallway with nowhere to redirect. Dumbledore had slowed. Harry had kept his pace exactly even. Harry, Dumbledore said, when they were 3 feet apart. Professor, Harry said, and kept walking. He heard Dumbledore stop and stand in the corridor behind him and say nothing else, and he turned the corner without looking back. That was all they needed from each other right now. What Dumbledore was doing, Harry had worked this out through 3 days of paying attention to the people around him with the calibrated attention he now had access to, was building a case. Not for the formal hearing, or not only for that. He was doing something more fundamental, he was managing the story the wizarding world was telling about him. He was talking to people. Staff members, mostly, and visiting ministry officials, and the Beauxbatons and Durmstrang heads who hadn't yet returned to their schools. He wasn't saying anything overtly defensive. He was being himself, which was the most sophisticated defense available to someone in his position, because himself was a very compelling thing to be. People who had spent 40 years trusting Albus Dumbledore didn't stop trusting him because a newspaper said something. They kept trusting him and looked for ways to contextualize the newspaper. Harry watched this happen in real time with Ron's family. Arthur Weasley visited on the Saturday after the maze, having apparently decided that whatever Molly needed to think about required his physical presence at Hogwarts. He arrived looking tired in the way that people look when they've been up several nights, and he sat with McGonagall for an hour, and then he asked to see Harry. They sat in one of the smaller courtyard gardens, the two of them, while the November morning went grey around them and the last leaves came off the trees in the wind. Arthur Weasley looked at Harry with the specific expression of a man who loves someone and is trying to figure out if that love requires him to say difficult things. Ron told his mother, he said. I know. He told me he told her. Arthur stopped. She's been very quiet. Molly quiet it's its own kind of weather. It means she's working through something big. She doesn't have to work through it on my account, Harry said. I'm not asking anyone to, Harry. Arthur's voice was gentle but direct. You're not asking. That's part of the problem. You've stopped asking for things from the people around you and started just managing. Which I understand. Which I think is probably healthy. But the people who love you need to be allowed to feel things about what happened to you. Harry looked at him. This was the kind of thing that snuck up on him still. The emotional content that arrived without warning, now that nothing was suppressing it. I know, he said. I'm working on that. Ron is. Arthur paused, picking his words with the deliberate care he used when he was being truthful rather than comfortable. Ron is holding things together well. Better than I expected, honestly. He's a more resilient boy than he gets credit for, because he doesn't perform resilience, he just has it. But he needs you to let him be your friend as well as your ally. Not just someone useful in a campaign. He is my friend, Harry said. I know that. He knows that. Arthur looked at the bare tree branches. The two things don't have to be separate. You can be doing serious things and also be 14 and have your friends around you without it being a strategy. Harry was quiet. Then, I had compulsion charms on me until very recently that were specifically oriented toward using relationships as tools. Toward keeping people at a functional distance rather than a personal one. He paused. I think I'm still, some of it was the charms and some of it is just me, and I'm not always sure which is which. Arthur Weasley looked at him for a long moment with something in his face that was the cleanest form of parental feeling, not complicated by anything, just there. That's the most honest thing I've heard you say, he said. I'm trying to be honest about things I'm not sure of, Harry said. Instead of just managing them. Good, Arthur said simply. Keep doing that. He stood, brushed leaves off his robes. Molly will come around. She loves you, Harry. The thing with Dumbledore is very difficult for her because she needs to keep both things true. She needs him to have been what she believed him to be and for what happened to you to have been wrong. She's working out if that's possible. It is possible, Harry said. Both things are true. Arthur smiled, and it reached his eyes fully. Tell her that when she's ready to hear it. The formal investigation's accelerated timeline hit its first obstruction 6 days later. It came in the form of a ministry memo, not from Bones, but from the minister's office directly, addressed to Ogden as acting Wisengamot chair and CC to Bones and Harry's legal representative at Gringotts. The memo was written in the careful bureaucratic language that meant something had been decided several layers above where it could be openly questioned, and what it said, unwrapped from the administrative language, was, given the active threat of Voldemort's partial return and the ongoing instability it represented, certain elements of the investigation timeline were being placed under a voluntary review period of 90 days in the interest of maintaining institutional stability during a period of magical emergency. Hermione read it and translated it in about 30 seconds flat. They're stalling, she said. Fudge is stalling. He's decided that Dumbledore is more useful to him as a functional authority figure than as a liability, because Voldemort being back, even contained, makes people want a strong symbol. And Dumbledore is the strongest symbol available. So he's pulling the investigation back, Ron said. Slowing it. Not pulling it. He can't pull it, it's already been voted through. But 90 days gives Dumbledore time to shore up support and gives Fudge distance from the decision. Harry read the memo again. He looked at it with the clear attention he now brought to things, reading not just the words but the spaces between them, the decisions embedded in the language. He thought about Fudge, about the calculation he'd made at the task, about giving him a stable narrative with himself in it. He'd underestimated how quickly Fudge's self-interest would recalibrate when the competing priorities became Dumbledore as asset versus Harry as liability. "Bones," he said. "She'll fight it," Hermione said. "She has grounds. The CMA investigation is technically DMLE authority, not Ministry authority, and Fudge overstepping into DMLE procedure. How long will the fight take?" A pause. "In normal Wizengamot pace? Weeks. Months. Right." He folded the memo. "Who does Fudge actually listen to?" "Himself," Ron said. "Who does he believe he's listening to?" Harry corrected. Hermione thought. "People who represent public opinion. The prophet, mainly. And senior members who have influence with his voter base. Business sector. Old family money. The kind of people who put him in office." "He's afraid of Voldemort coming back fully," Harry said. "That's what's driving this. He'd rather have a functional Dumbledore managing the situation than an open criminal investigation that might destabilize everything," Hermione said. "So I need to make it more destabilizing to stall than to proceed," Harry said. She looked at him. "How?" "The 3 seats," he said. "If I formally occupy them and call for an emergency session of the Wizengamot on the grounds of interference with an active CMA investigation, Fudge has to respond publicly. He can't do this through a memo if it becomes an open session issue. He'll mobilize against you," she said. "He has allies in the Wizengamot. Older members, traditionalists, he has some," Harry said. "I need to know how many." He stood and went to find McGonagall. She was in her office and she listened to the full situation with the focused stillness she brought to problems that required rapid assessment. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly the amount of time it took her to make a decision. "Marchbanks," she said. "Vance. The Abbott vote suggests he's movable. Whitmore is genuinely fair-minded. Bones has the DMLE block, which is 4 additional senior members who vote with her on procedural matters." She was counting. "That's potentially 9. You need 10 for an emergency session vote. Who's the 10th? She looked at him. "Augusta Longbottom." Harry thought about Neville. About the quiet, steady boy who had been getting stronger all year, who had started sitting slightly differently in herbology since the start of term, as if his own posture was gradually catching up to something that had always been there. "I'll talk to Neville," Harry said. "His grandmother is..." McGonagall paused. "She is formidable and she is traditional and she distrusted Dumbledore during the last war for reasons she has never fully articulated to the public. She sat in the Wizengamot for 30 years and knows every procedure it has. If she understands what's happening, I'll talk to Neville," Harry said again. He found Neville in the greenhouses. That was usually where Neville could be found when he wasn't in class, among the plants, moving with the specific ease of a person who is completely competent in their environment. Harry let himself in, and the warmth and green smell of the greenhouse settled around them, and Neville looked up from a venomous tentacula that he'd been carefully pruning. "Harry," he said. "Hey." Harry came and sat on the edge of a potting bench. He looked at Neville directly. "I need to ask you something, and I want to be straight about it rather than talking around it." Neville set down his shears. He turned to face Harry with the full attention of someone who had been watching the events of the last 2 weeks with the quiet comprehension of a person standing close enough to see the details. "Okay," he said. "The prophecy," Harry said. "The one Dumbledore used to justify the charms. Do you know about it?" Neville was quiet. "I know there was a prophecy," he said carefully. "I know, I've heard things. That it could have been me as easily as you." "Yes," Harry said. "It could have been. The way Dumbledore explained it at the hearing, a child born at the end of July, to parents who had defied Voldemort. That was you as much as me. He chose me, and he put 89 charms on the child he chose, and he left the other one alone. Neville absorbed this with the steadiness that Harry had come to understand was not passivity but something else, a deep, anchored quality that didn't get knocked sideways easily. "I know what happened to my parents," Neville said. "Bellatrix Lestrange. The Cruciatus." His voice was even. "I know Dumbledore knew who did it and where they were in the first days after it happened, and he chose to prioritize other things." Harry looked at him. He hadn't known that. Or, he'd known about the Longbottoms, everyone knew about the Longbottoms, but not the specific detail of timing, of Dumbledore's knowledge. "Neville," he said. "He's not my enemy," Neville said, and the precision of his word choice was deliberate. "He's done important things. I believe that. But he has also made decisions about people I love as though they were acceptable costs." He looked at the tentacula, its leaves a deep poisonous green. "Gran has said things, over the years. Not clearly. She talks around it. But I know she has questions about him that she's never asked openly because the timing was never right." "The timing might be right now," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "What do you need?" Harry told him. Explained the memo, the stalling, the 10-vote threshold for an emergency session. Watched Neville's face as he processed it, clean and clear, no performance, the thinking of someone who was deciding what the right thing was. "Gran will want to talk to you herself," Neville said. "Before she commits to anything. She won't take my word for it, not because she doesn't trust me, but because she'll want to look you in the face." "Tell her I'll meet her whenever she wants," Harry said. "She'll want it in writing," Neville said, which might have been the most Neville thing Harry had ever heard him say, and which made Harry feel a sudden sharp fondness for him. "I'll write it tonight." He wrote 3 letters that evening, one to Augusta Longbottom, one to Bones updating her on the Wisengamot strategy, and one that he'd been putting off writing for 2 weeks. He sat with the third one for a while before starting it. "Professor Dumbledore," he wrote, and then sat back and thought about what he actually wanted to say. Not threats. Not anger. He'd felt the anger, worked through it, it was real and it was his and it was not going anywhere, but it didn't belong in this letter. What he wanted to say was something more precise than that. "I don't intend to destroy you," he wrote. "I want to be clear about that, because I think you're probably operating under the assumption that this is about revenge. It isn't. What I want is straightforward, an end to the situation you created, a full accounting of what was done so that it cannot be done again, and a judicial process that determines appropriate consequences through legitimate means. I don't want to be the person who brings you down. I want to be the person who made sure the process worked the way it's supposed to. I also want you to know something. My mother built a legal framework in the last months of her life because she was trying to protect me from what she knew you intended. She was 21 years old and she was dying and she was doing careful, meticulous legal work on her son's behalf. I think about that. I think about what it took to do that with the time she had, and who she must have been to do it. I don't think you thought about who she was when you continued anyway. I think you should." Harry Potter. He sealed it and sent it before he could reconsider. It was not strategic. It wasn't designed to advance anything. He just wanted to say it. The reply came the next morning. 3 words, in the distinctive Dumbledore script: "You are right." He put it in the Potter Vault file and didn't show it to anyone. Augusta Longbottom arrived at Hogwarts on a Thursday afternoon in the specific manner of a woman who has been coming to Hogwarts for 50 years and considers it family property. She was tall, stern, hawk-nosed, wearing a hat with a long-suffering taxidermied vulture on it that was, Harry noticed, moving very slightly in a way that suggested it was enchanted. She looked at Harry across the table in the small meeting room McGonagall had arranged, and she assessed him with the speed and completeness of a woman who had been reading people in formal settings since before he was born. "You're the Potter boy," she said. "Yes. You look like James, but you have Lily's eyes and her sense of structure. Neville tells me you've been operating with considerable clarity for a 14-year-old. I've been trying, Harry said. Trying is for people who haven't decided yet, she said. You've decided. That's different. She put her handbag on the table with a precise thump. Tell me about the memo. He told her. She listened without interruption, which was the kind of listening that meant the interruptions were happening internally. When he finished, she said, Fudge is protecting himself by protecting Dumbledore. Oldest story in political history. She looked at her handbag. I've been waiting for Albus Dumbledore to answer for certain things for a very long time. Harry was quiet. Not about you specifically, she said. She paused. About a pattern. A long pattern of decisions made by one man that other people were expected to live inside. My son and his wife are in St. Mungo's. They have been for 13 years. They will never come home. She said it without grief in her voice, not because the grief wasn't there but because she had long ago built it into the walls of how she functioned. I have never believed that there was nothing Dumbledore could have done. He has told me there wasn't. I have not believed him. He knew where Bellatrix was in the first days, Harry said quietly. She looked at him. Her expression did not change and something in her went very still. How do you know that? Neville told me. He'd heard it somewhere. She sat with this for a long moment. The enchanted vulture on her hat shifted slightly. You want my vote for an emergency session, she said. I want the process to work, Harry said. The vote is what makes the process work. That's a politician's answer. No, Harry said. A politician's answer would be softer. My answer is I want the process to work specifically so that Dumbledore faces a full formal hearing with all evidence presented before he can stall it with 90 days of Fudge-sponsored delay. That's not soft. But it's still the process. She looked at him for a long time. Your mother, she said, was the finest mind of her generation. I knew her slightly. She came to a summer symposium once, before you were born. She was 20 and she argued with 3 senior ministry officials about magical rights legislation and they couldn't lay a glove on her. She paused. You have her directness. I'm trying to, Harry said. Augusta Longbottom picked up her handbag and stood. You'll have the vote, she said. Tell Miss Bones to file the session request tomorrow morning. I'll be on record by afternoon. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me, she said. This is long overdue. She looked at him one more time, and something moved in her face that might have been recognition, or might have been something that was about Neville as much as about Harry. My grandson likes you, she said, as if this were relevant. He doesn't like many people. He likes useful people and honest people and he seems to think you're both. She nodded once, sharply, and left. The emergency session was called for the following Tuesday. The 48 hours before it were the most pressured of Harry's month, which was saying something. Dumbledore's legal team filed 2 procedural objections, both of which Bones dismantled in writing by midnight. Fudge released a statement about maintaining institutional stability that the Prophet ran on page 2 with a headline that was, for the Prophet, remarkably ambivalent. Letters poured into the Wisengamot administrative office. Bones told him this, told him the volume was unprecedented, from ordinary wizarding families who had read the original page 1 story and the follow-up reporting and were forming opinions at a rate that the Wisengamot wasn't used to contending with. 3 of those letters, Harry was told, were from families who had had similar experiences. Not as comprehensive as his, nothing as architecturally complete as 89 Charms, but decisions made about their children or their households in the name of the greater good, with Dumbledore's hand at the center. Small things. A redirect here. A suppression there. Nothing that had been visible until now. He read summaries of those letters and felt the anger return, and this time he let it be there fully, and it was clarifying rather than destabilizing. It was useful anger. The kind that pointed somewhere instead of just burning. Ron found him the night before the session in the common room, late enough that the fire had burned low and everyone else was asleep. Ron sat down across from him and didn't say anything for a moment. Just sat. "My mum sent another owl," he said eventually. "Yeah?" she said. He looked at the fire. "She said that what happened to you was wrong. She said it clearly, just like that. And then she said that she was going to need more time before she could talk about Dumbledore himself, but that wasn't going to change the first part." He paused. "And then she sent 12 sausage rolls because apparently that's how she expresses solidarity." "That's the best form of solidarity," Harry said. "The rolls are in my bag if you want one." "Yes," Harry said immediately. Ron produced the sausage rolls, and they sat by the dying fire and ate them, and didn't talk for a while. The common room was quiet and the castle settled around them with the old stone sounds it made at night, and Harry thought about tomorrow and then set that aside because tomorrow could wait 10 minutes. "Ron," he said. "Yeah. Arthur told me I'd been treating my friends like assets in a campaign." Ron looked at him sideways. "Did he?" "He was right. I mean, slightly." Ron was quiet. "You're not as bad as you think. You've just been," he searched for the word. "Concentrated. Like everything's been pointed in one direction and there's not much room for," he gestured vaguely. "For being 14, Harry said. "Yeah. A bit." Harry looked at the embers. "I don't actually know how to just be 14 anymore," he said. "I'm not sure I ever did." "Nobody who grew up like you did knows how to just be 14, Ron said, with the directness he brought to obvious truths that other people were dancing around. "That's not a new problem. That's just your problem. You work with it." He picked up the last sausage roll. "We'll figure it out. After all this, when it's a bit quieter. We'll figure out how to be normal sometimes." "Normal," Harry said. "Normal-ish," Ron allowed. Harry thought about normal-ish and thought it might actually be something worth working toward. Not instead of everything else. Just alongside it. The session was held in the full Wisengamot chamber, not the closed hearing room, but the large one with the tiered benches and the formal seating and the specific weight of a space that had been making consequential decisions for centuries. Harry walked into it between McGonagall and Sirius and felt the room register him the way rooms full of people register someone who is both exactly what they expected and completely different from what they expected. He took his seats. All three of them, technically, 3 chairs at the petitioner's bench that had been formally registered under the Potter, Peverell, and Gryffindor designations. He sat in the center one and let the other 2 be visible on either side, because the symbolism mattered and he wasn't above using symbolism when it was accurate. Dumbledore sat at the respondent's bench, 20 feet across the chamber. His legal team, 3 wizards in formal robes, sat behind him. He was in his characteristic deep blue. He looked at Harry when Harry sat down and Harry looked back and neither of them looked away, and the room, which had been at a low murmur, went quiet. Ogden's gavel came down. Emergency session of the Wisengamot, called under Section 14 of the Judicial Procedures Act, petitioning party Harry James Potter, responding party Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, subject the Ministry's interference with an active coercive magic act investigation. We will hear the petitioner. Harry stood. He'd thought about this moment for several days. He knew what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it, and he'd resisted every suggestion from every quarter to have someone else say it or to soften it or to frame it as anything other than what it was. The Ministry's memo represents an attempt by the Minister's office to subordinate DMLE procedural authority to political preference, he said. This is not unprecedented, it's been done before, in smaller ways, when the Ministry found an investigation inconvenient. What is unprecedented is the subject of the investigation. He looked around the chamber. Albus Dumbledore committed criminal acts against me over 13 years. Those acts were documented, verified, and voted through for investigation by this body 3 weeks ago. The minister's attempt to delay that investigation by 90 days does not serve institutional stability. It serves one institution, Dumbledore's continued authority. Which is the same authority that was used to harm me in the first place. He let that sit for a moment. I'm not here to relitigate the hearing, he said. The evidence is established. I'm here because the process that this body voted for is being obstructed, and that obstruction serves no one in this room except the man sitting across from me, and possibly the minister's desire to avoid a difficult public moment. He looked across at Dumbledore directly. The investigation should proceed on its original timeline. Not because I want it to, though I do, but because the rule of law in this chamber should not be adjustable based on who the subject is. He sat down. The session ran for 4 hours. Dumbledore's legal team argued the ministry memo's legitimacy with considerable skill. They'd had 2 days to prepare and they used them. Bones counter-argued with the precision of someone who had been waiting for this specific fight for a long time. Ogden ran the procedure cleanly and called the vote at the end without drama. 11-7, in favor of dismissing the memo and reinstating the original investigation timeline. The chamber cleared in the organized shuffle of formal proceedings concluding, and Harry sat in his seat for a moment after it was over, just breathing. Sirius appeared beside him and sat in the Peveril chair, which seemed appropriate given the family's history of collecting unusual situations. 11-7, he said. Yes. The session you called, which Dumbledore didn't want called, ruled against the ministry's obstruction, which means the investigation proceeds on the original timeline, which means the full hearing is in 3 weeks. Sirius looked at the empty chamber. You've been doing this for less than a month. It's been a busy month, Harry said. Your father once kept the Quidditch Cup from Slytherin for 2 consecutive years using a combination of legal loopholes and what I can only describe as creative spatial interpretation, Sirius said. It was the most impressive thing I'd seen a teenager do until approximately now. Harry stood, feeling the weight of the session lift and something else settle in its place, not satisfaction exactly, but the clean feeling of a thing being right. Of the world being shaped slightly more the way it should be. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, Sirius agreed. They walked out of the Wizengamot chamber together, and the torchlight in the ministry corridor was its usual golden inadequacy, and somewhere in the building Pettigrew was in a cell giving testimony that was systematically dismantling every piece of false architecture built around Sirius's imprisonment, and somewhere in the chamber they'd just left 11 votes had decided that the process mattered more than the man. Harry walked through the ministry corridor and out into the cold evening air and felt, for the first time without qualification, without compulsion, without anything but himself underneath it, free. Not done. Not safe. Not finished with any of it. Just free. That was enough. Chapter 6, The Boy Who Chose the Full Wizengamot hearing was set for a Wednesday. 3 weeks had passed since the emergency session, and in those 3 weeks the investigation had produced a document that Bones described to Harry as the most comprehensive piece of prosecutorial evidence I have seen in 22 years at the DMLE. She said it without visible satisfaction, because Bones was not a woman who derived satisfaction from evidence of harm done to children. She said it with the flat, steady quality of someone who intends to use every word of it. Harry had read it. All 234 pages. He'd sat in McGonagall's office on a Sunday evening with the fire going and Sirius in the chair across from him and worked through the full report from cover to cover, page by page, and when he finished he put it down carefully on the desk and sat still for a moment. Sirius was watching him. He'd read it too, 2 days earlier, and had dealt with it by spending 90 minutes in the room of requirement doing very loud and apparently quite destructive magic before coming back to the castle with cleaner eyes and broken knuckles that Madame Pomfrey had fixed without comment. You all right? Sirius asked. I'm reading the section on my parents again, Harry said. The bit about the will. Yes. He looked at the page. Dumbledore was named executor of the Potter estate in James's will. He had the will sealed for, he checked. He filed for a 30-year sealing order on the grounds of wartime security. 30 years. I would have been 31 before I was legally allowed to know what my parents left me. Sirius said nothing, because nothing was the right response. He was thorough, Harry said. That's what gets me. Every angle. The will, the vault, the Wizengamot seats, the charms, the Dursleys. He thought of everything. He did, Sirius said. And he still thought he was the good guy. Harry set the document down. That's not arrogance. It's something else. He genuinely believed that managing my entire life was a cost worth paying. Yes. I don't hate him for it. He looked up at Sirius. I want to be clear that I'm not. You don't have to explain your feelings to me, Sirius said. Not about this. Harry was quiet. The fire did its thing. I'm angry, he said. I think I'll be angry for a long time. But the anger isn't, it's not what I bring into that room tomorrow. What I bring in is the document. Sirius looked at him. James would have been furious, he said. In the most productive and specifically targeted way. He was very good at directed fury. He paused. Lily would have been cold about it. The kind of cold that's worse than fury. Which am I? Sirius studied him for a moment. Both, he said. At different times. It's very unsettling. Harry picked up the document again and went back to reading. The morning of the hearing, Hermione presented him with a 12-page brief she'd been working on for a week, which cross-referenced the evidence in the investigation report against 3 relevant pieces of legislation and 2 historical precedents in ways that Bones's team had apparently not yet connected. She handed it to him at breakfast with the expression of someone who knows they've done very good work and is mildly embarrassed about mentioning it. Give it to Bones, she said. The Runcorn case precedent on page 9 is the key one. It establishes that the duration of a coercive enchantment is an aggravating factor in sentencing regardless of the caster's stated intent. He looked at the brief. At the careful, dense, completely brilliant 12 pages. Hermione, he said. I just had the time to research it properly, she said, waving it off. It was there in the records, it just needed, Hermione. She stopped. Thank you, he said. She straightened her parchment unnecessarily. You're going to be fine today, she said, and her voice had the specific warmth she reserved for things she meant completely. You know exactly what you're doing. He passed her brief to Bones in the ministry corridor 40 minutes later. Bones read the key pages in about 6 minutes, looked up, and said, Granger, flatly. Yes, Harry said. She's wasted at school, Bones said, and tucked the brief into her case. The full chamber was different from the closed hearing. That had been intimate, 12 people in a room, the formal quiet of something contained. This was the Wizengamot in its full configuration, 52 members, the tiered benches arranged in a horseshoe, the Wizengamot seal on the wall behind Ogden's chair, the weight of the space settling on everyone in it. A public gallery had been opened, which was unusual for an investigation hearing but had been granted after 3 separate formal requests from the press and twice that from private citizens. The gallery was full. Harry didn't look at it. He sat at the petitioner's bench between McGonagall and Bones, who had arranged themselves with the specific precision of 2 people who have discussed seating and arrived at an agreement without verbalizing it. Sirius was in the gallery behind him, formally still in a supervised release status pending full exoneration, which Bones expected to be complete within the week, but present and visible and containing himself with visible effort. Dumbledore's side was, Harry had to admit, formidable. 3 senior barristers, 2 Wizengamot members who had recused from the hearing but were permitted as character representatives, and Dumbledore himself, who arrived with the composure of someone who had been preparing for this longer than anyone else in the room. He sat down, adjusted his robes, and looked across at Harry with the blue eyes clear and direct. Harry met them and held them and felt nothing from the old compulsion. Just a man. Ogden's gavel. The formal opening. The record established. Then Bones stood up and spent 35 minutes presenting the evidence. She was methodical, devastating, and completely without drama. She walked the chamber through the investigation report section by section, citing the diagnostic, citing Lily Potter's testimony, citing the Gringotts records on the sealed will and the suspended estate, citing the 3 individual testimonies from other families who had come forward in the 3 weeks since the emergency session. She cited the Runcorn precedent on page 9 without mentioning Hermione. Harry watched the chamber while she spoke. The faces ranged from grim confirmation, the members who'd been at the closed hearing, to genuine shock from those who hadn't. 3 of the older members had gone very still in the way that people go still when they're doing private recalibration of someone they trusted. One member, a small woman near the top of the left bench, had her hand pressed over her mouth. Watching Dumbledore, Harry realized, she was watching Dumbledore rather than Bones, trying to read the man against the evidence, wanting the man she knew to explain the evidence away. He wasn't going to. That was the part Harry had understood for 3 weeks. Dumbledore had no defense available to him that didn't make things worse, because every true defense confirmed the facts. When Bones sat down, Dumbledore's lead barrister, a tall, silver-haired witch named Apollonia Crest who had apparently won every major Wisengamot case she'd taken in the last 15 years, stood up. She was good. Harry had expected good and she exceeded it. She structured the defense not as denial but as mitigation, which was the only viable approach. She walked through the prophecy, the war, the strategic necessity argument. She called 2 expert witnesses on magical theory, both of whom were genuine authorities, neither of whom was willing to lie but both of whom provided legitimate academic context for how a wizard of Dumbledore's experience might have interpreted the prophecy's requirements. She presented 4 letters from ministry officials, 2 from ICW representatives, and 1 from a retired Auror who had served during the war, all attesting to Dumbledore's indispensable role in the defeat of Voldemort. Then she did something Harry hadn't fully anticipated. She argued the timing. The investigation report establishes, Crest said, her voice measured and precise, that the enchantments placed by Professor Dumbledore were removed less than 4 weeks ago. In the week since their removal, Mr. Potter has, by his own account and by DMLE records, detected and neutralized a portkey constructed by a Death Eater operative, physically restrained Peter Pettigrew, applied a stasis charm to a partially corporeal dark entity, called an emergency Wisengamot session, presented evidence to this body, and occupied 3 hereditary seats. She paused. This is extraordinary by any measure. It also suggests that an unenchanted Harry Potter, at the age of 14, represents a magical and strategic capability that, in the view of my client, was precisely what the prophecy required him not to be until the correct moment. The chamber shifted slightly. Harry felt it, the weight of the argument landing with some of the older members, the ones who had lived through the war, who understood what Voldemort had actually meant. Crest continued, Professor Dumbledore's actions were not arbitrary. They were calibrated to a specific outcome. The outcome, the defeat of Voldemort, has not yet been achieved. The threat remains. What my client did was not done in malice. It was done in the full weight of knowledge about what failure would mean. I ask this chamber to consider not just what was done, but what might have been lost had it not been done. She sat down. The chamber was very quiet. Ogden said, Mr. Potter. You have the right of response. Harry stood. He thought about everything he'd prepared. The legislative citations, the precedents, the carefully structured dismantling of Crest's mitigation case. All of it was there, accurate and ready. He set it aside. The argument you just heard, he said, is that my childhood was an acceptable cost. That my parents placing me with people who were cruel to me was an acceptable cost. That having my natural emotions suppressed, my magical core limited, my instinct to question authority removed, that all of it was an acceptable cost. He looked around the chamber. And the argument is structured as a question of strategy. Whether a more powerful, more self-determined Harry Potter would have arrived at the correct moment in the correct condition. He let that sit. "I want to address that on its own terms," he said. "Not emotionally. Strategically." He looked at Crest, then at Dumbledore. "The prophecy says one of us must die at the other's hand. It says nothing about how we get there. It says nothing about what condition either of us must be in when we do." Professor Dumbledore interpreted the prophecy to require a specific psychological state in me, willingness to sacrifice. He assumed that an unchained Harry Potter, at the moment of crisis, would choose survival over sacrifice. He paused. "He was wrong about that," he said. "Not because the charms made me willing to sacrifice, they didn't, not really. The charms made me unable to conceive of alternatives. That's not the same thing. A person who chooses death because they can't imagine another option hasn't really chosen." He held Dumbledore's eyes across the chamber. "My mother understood this. She died knowing it, and she built her legal testimony around it. She believed that a Harry Potter who was fully himself, fully powerful, fully capable of conceiving every option, would still, in the right moment, be capable of choosing sacrifice. Not because he couldn't imagine anything else. Because he'd weighed everything and decided it was worth it." The chamber was still. "I don't know if she was right," Harry said. "I haven't been at that moment yet. But I know this, the charms didn't make me brave. They made me compliant. And those are not the same thing. Bravery requires the genuine possibility of choosing otherwise. Compliance just requires nothing having been done to allow it." He sat down. The chamber remained still for about 5 seconds after he sat, which was long for a body that moved on procedural momentum. Ogden said, slightly differently than before, with the careful register of a man who has heard something that has altered the texture of the room, "Mr. Dumbledore. You may address the chamber directly." Dumbledore rose. He stood for a moment before speaking, and in that moment Harry watched him, watched the deliberation, the decision, the settling into something. "I will not repeat what my counsel has argued," Dumbledore said. "It is accurate and it is relevant and I believe the chamber should weigh it. But I want to say something separately." He looked around the chamber with the unhurried clarity of a man who has spent 80 years cultivating the ability to hold a room. "I placed those charms in the full conviction that I was doing what was required. I was wrong." He paused. "Not about the prophecy. Not about the threat Voldemort represented. I was wrong about what was required." He looked at Harry. "Harry told me during the closed hearing that love does not give you the right. He was correct. I loved him, in whatever way I am capable of love, and I told myself that love was sufficient authorization for what I did. It was not. Nothing was." The chamber was deeply quiet. "I will accept whatever consequences this body determines are appropriate," Dumbledore said. "I ask only that the chamber also weigh the ongoing threat of Voldemort's return, and consider what structures of response are necessary in the period following this hearing. The boy has proven, unambiguously, that he does not need my management. That was the question I was answering with the charms, and he has answered it rather more definitively than I could have." He looked at Harry one more time, and in his eyes there was something that Harry had not seen there before because the compulsion had always replaced it with warmth. Something genuine, and clear, and complicated. "I am sorry," he said. "Not for the upset. For the act." He sat down. The deliberation took 2 hours. Harry waited in an anteroom with McGonagall and Sirius and Bones, and the time passed in the particular texture of waiting that is not anxiety but a kind of suspended attention. Sirius played Exploding Snap with Bones, which was deeply surreal, and won twice and lost once and seemed generally better for the activity. McGonagall sat very upright and drank 3 cups of tea and said very little. At one point she said, "You were brilliant in there." "You were sitting right there," he said. "Yes," she said, "and I was a witness to it, and I am noting it." He looked at her, at the woman who had found 89 compulsion charms in a Transfiguration classroom and had sat down beside a 14-year-old and told him the truth without softening it, and had then spent a month dismantling the architecture of harm that had been built around him with the precision and fury of someone who took their responsibilities more seriously than anyone had the right to ask. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. You said you'd been watching me for 4 years and hadn't done enough. What made you do the scan that day? The specific day?" She was quiet for a moment. "You told me the Transfiguration work was requiring a 3 out of 10 effort," she said. "And I looked at the magic, and it felt like someone had both hands on your shoulders pushing down. I had felt that before and not examined it. That day, I examined it. What changed?" She looked at her teacup. I think for years I had been filing my doubts in the wrong place," she said. "Putting them somewhere I could trust Albus and not have to act. And then at some point the file was full and the next doubt didn't fit and I had to put it somewhere else." She looked up at him. It was the 3 out of 10. That was the doubt that didn't fit. He thought about this. "I'm glad it didn't fit." "So am I," she said quietly. "Every day." The deliberation resolved. They filed back into the chamber. Harry took his seat. The gallery was quieter than it had been, the specific quiet of people who have spent 2 hours thinking rather than watching. Ogden read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The enumeration of counts took 4 minutes. Guilty of criminal application of compulsion charms on a minor. Guilty of magical core suppression. Guilty of fraudulent exercise of guardian authority. Guilty of interference with the Potter estate contrary to the terms of the Potter will. Guilty of suppression of evidence, the sealed will, the sealed testimony, relevant to a criminal matter. 31 counts in total. Sentencing was to be determined at a separate hearing in 30 days. During those 30 days, suspension of all official positions, effective immediately. Chief Warlock suspended. Headmaster of Hogwarts suspended. ICW representative suspended pending review. Dumbledore was to remain available for the sentencing hearing and was subject to a travel restriction within Britain. He received this standing. He received it with the composure that was entirely his and that Harry had once found comforting and now simply found to be what it was, the composure of a man who has been carrying his certainty for so long that losing it leaves him standing in the same posture for lack of anything else to do. Then it was over. The chamber cleared with the organized movement of a formal session dissolving into ordinary motion, and the gallery released its people, and voices started up everywhere, and Harry stood at his bench and felt the room moving around him and took a moment to just be in it. To feel the weight and the reality of what had just happened. Sirius was through the gallery gate in about 20 seconds, which was faster than strictly dignified. He appeared at Harry's shoulder and said nothing but put a hand on the back of Harry's neck briefly, the way you do with someone who is family. Ron and Hermione had been in the gallery, he'd told them he wanted them there this time, had specifically overridden his own instinct to manage them out of it. They came down together, and Ron's face was doing the thing where every feeling had arrived simultaneously and he was coping by looking slightly overwhelmed, and Hermione was holding her notebook against her chest with both hands like it was structural. Guilty on 31 counts, Ron said, when he got close enough. 31. Yes, Harry said. And they suspended him from everything immediately. Yes. And he just, Ron looked at the far end of the chamber where Dumbledore's bench was now empty. He said sorry. Like actually sorry, not the other kind. Yes, Harry said. What do you do with that? Harry thought about it. I don't know yet, he said. I think that's something I work out over time. Hermione unclenched slightly from her notebook. The Runcorn precedent, she said. At sentencing. It's going to be significant. Bones knows, Harry said. I know she knows, Hermione stopped. Exhaled. I wanted to say it. He looked at the two of them, Ron, who had sat with him in the common room at midnight with sausage rolls and quietly resolved the question of loyalty without making it a production, and Hermione, who had spent 3 weeks building a research structure around his case because she was incapable of being near a problem without trying to solve it, and whom he loved for it. "Thank you," he said to both of them. "Not for the work." He stopped, because the words that arrived were inadequate and he said them anyway. "For being here." Ron looked at the ceiling briefly in the way he did when he was being asked to handle emotion. "We're always here," he said. "That's not, you don't have to thank us for that." "I know," Harry said. "I'm doing it anyway." McGonagall appeared and organized them out of the chamber with the efficiency she brought to transitions, and they were in the ministry corridor and then the atrium and then the cold outside, and the hearing was behind them and the sentencing was 30 days ahead and Voldemort was in a ministry containment cell and Sirius was free and the world was the world, complicated and unfinished and full of things that still needed doing. That evening, back at Hogwarts, which was McGonagall's now, as acting headmistress, installed with the specific satisfaction of the Board of Governors who had been waiting to make the appointment since the moment Dumbledore's suspension had become real, Harry went to the room of requirement. He sat in the center of the open floor and held his wand loosely and thought. He thought about the prophecy, which was still real and still active, and about Voldemort, who was contained but not destroyed, and about the work that was still ahead, the actual war, whenever it came to its actual shape, the confrontation that the prophecy had always described. He thought about what he'd said in the chamber, about sacrifice and choice, about his mother's belief that a fully unchained Harry would still, in the right moment, make the right choice. He didn't know yet if she was right. He thought she probably was. He thought that was not the same as being afraid of the moment when he'd have to find out. He cast the Patronus, and the stag filled the room, and it was enormous and solid and entirely itself. He looked at it for a while. Then he let it fade and stood up and walked to the door, and the door opened before he reached it, and the corridor was there, ordinary stone and torchlight, the castle he'd grown up in that he now felt differently about, not worse, not with the compelled warmth gone. Better, actually. Because his love for it was real now, all of it, chosen rather than installed. He walked through the castle toward the common room and took the long way, the route that went past the astronomy tower and the charms corridor and the third-floor passage that he'd first run through 4 years ago, half terrified and half excited and entirely unaware of what he was. He walked it in the evening quiet and the torchlight caught him and didn't catch him and the castle murmured around him in the way that living buildings murmur. He thought about the months ahead. The sentencing. Sirius's formal exoneration. The reconstruction of Hogwarts governance. The Wisengamot seats and what he'd use them for. The ongoing containment of Voldemort and the question of when containment became insufficient and what happened then. He thought about all of it with the clear, unobstructed attention that was his now, that felt like thinking had always felt in his imagination before he'd ever actually been able to do it fully. He thought about his mother writing a letter when she was 21 with her hands probably shaking and her mind working at full speed because she had figured out what was coming and was determined to build something for her son to land on. He thought about her being right. He arrived at the portrait hole and said the password and climbed through. The common room was full, the specific evening before curfew fullness of Gryffindor Tower, students playing chess and doing homework and arguing about Quidditch, the fire high and warm, everything in its ordinary place. Ron looked up from his chess game across the room and raised an eyebrow. "You all right?" Harry nodded. "Yeah." Hermione was at the table near the window with a stack of books and her notebook, which was normal, except that she'd left the chair beside her pointedly open and had put a cup of tea at his place, which was new. He crossed the room and sat down and picked up the tea. Sirius had been given the use of a private suite on the 4th floor, McGonagall's doing, and was probably there now, reading or writing or staring at the ceiling doing the recalibration work of a man who had been given back the life he was owed and was still deciding what shape to let it take. Arthur and Molly Weasley had sent a letter that arrived that morning, before the hearing. Molly's handwriting, which he could now recognize, broad and emphatic, "Harry. We're proud of you. The rest of it I still need time with. But that part I'm sure of. He kept the letter in his pocket. Would probably keep it for a long time. What are you working on? He asked Hermione. Magical rights legislation, she said without looking up. Specifically the gaps. The Coercive Magic Act was last updated in 1893. There are significant holes. We're 14, he said. I'm aware, she said. I'm also aware that you have 3 Waisengamot seats, a formal legal standing, and a demonstrated ability to function at a level that makes the age point somewhat academic. He thought about that. About the seats, and what they could be used for. About the gaps in the legislation that had allowed 89 compulsion charms to exist undiscovered for 13 years because there was no formal system for detecting them, no mandatory child welfare scans, no audit process for magical interference with minors. He thought about the other 3 families, and what their letters had said, and how many others might not have found a McGonagall in a Transfiguration classroom. You're thinking about how to use the seats for something more than the Dumbledore case, she said, still not looking up. How do you know that? You have a specific thinking face. I have one face. You have several faces, she said, precisely. The one you have right now is the one that means you've identified a problem and you're sizing it. He picked up her notes and read the top page. The holes in the legislation were, now that she'd outlined them, obvious and significant. The Act protected against coercion detected after the fact but had no proactive framework. No standardized diagnostic requirement for children entering magical education. No reporting mechanism. No authority designated to conduct audits of historical enchantments. The audits, he said. She looked up. Yes? Mandatory diagnostic audits on school entry. Every child, every year. Looking specifically for enchantments that shouldn't be there. He set the notes down. You'd catch it early. Whatever Dumbledore did, whatever anyone else like him might do. She was quiet for a moment, and the expression she had was the one she got when something connected properly, when a structure clicked into place. That's the framework, she said. That's the legislative framework. The Coercive Magic Act Amendment. She pulled the notebook toward her and started writing. I'll have a first draft in, Hermione, he said. She stopped. Not tonight, he said. Tonight just, sit here. We can do the framework tomorrow. She looked at him. He held her gaze until she set down the quill and leaned back in her chair, and the thing in her face that was always running at high speed slowed just slightly. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he agreed. They sat by the window and drank their tea, and Ron's chess game made its intermittent sounds across the room, and the fire was warm and the castle held them in its old stone patience, and Harry let the evening be what it was. He was not finished. He understood that clearly. Voldemort was contained but not gone, the sentencing was 30 days away, the Waisengamot seats needed occupying, the legislation needed writing, and at some point the prophecy would demand its answer. He knew all of this. He held it all with the clear, steady attention that was his now, that was him, that had always been him under everything that had been laid over him. He was 14 years old and he was Harry James Potter, last of 3 old lines, and his magic was enormous and entirely his own, and the people around him were real and chosen and his because he'd chosen them, and the world was complicated and unfinished and full of things that needed doing. He thought, I can do them. Not bravado. Not performance. Just a fact, stated quietly to himself in the common room of his house in the school that was his home, on the evening of the day the process had worked the way it was supposed to work. Just a fact. Just himself. He picked up his tea and drank it and let the evening settle around him and did not plan anything at all for the next hour, which was, for Harry Potter, both the simplest and the most radical thing he had ever done. The fire crackled. Ron swore cheerfully at his chess pieces. Hermione's hand moved toward her notebook twice and pulled back both times. Outside, the November sky was clear and full of stars. Below it, in a ministry containment cell, something that had once been Tom Riddle pressed against the edges of the field that held it and found the field exactly as solid as it had been every hour for the past 3 weeks. Patient. Waiting. Harry Potter sat in a warm room and felt it waiting and felt his own certainty sitting quietly in his chest like a clean steady flame, and was not afraid of it at all. Not yet. Not ever again in the same way. What the charms had taken was not gone forever. It had simply been returned to the person it always belonged to. And he intended to use every last bit of it.